Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. All right, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. I was working at this movie theater a few months ago. My job was to clean the theaters after the movies ended. Usually, it was pretty straightforward. People would leave, I'd walk in, clean up the trash, sweep the floor, wipe the seats, and then move on to the next theater. Nothing too complicated or scary. But that night, something happened that stuck with me because it felt so real and dangerous. Not the usual movie theater horror stuff like ghosts or anything supernatural. This was something that made me really uneasy because I could tell it was about a person, not a spirit or a ghost, but someone who could have done harm. The theater I was cleaning that night was one of the bigger ones. It was deep inside the complex, with rows and rows of seats going up in a steep slope. The place was old and a little rundown in parts. The lights didn't work properly in some sections, especially the very top rows where the bulbs were burnt out and nobody had fixed them yet. That made the farthest row almost pitch black even when the house lights were on. It gave this weird, shadowy feeling like the top row was hiding in darkness even when the rest of the theater was lit. I was waiting for the last group of people to exit after the movie ended. They had been watching some late-night show, and the crowd wasn't very big. Just a few people here and there. I stood by the exit, watching the doors. At first, the lobby was busy with people leaving, talking, eating popcorn, but slowly it got quiet. After about 15 minutes, I thought everyone was gone. The theater was almost empty, so I stepped inside to start cleaning. The first few rows were easy. I picked up empty soda cups, candy wrappers, and crumpled up napkins. I wiped the armrests and seats with a cleaning spray, then moved up row by row. The smell of stale popcorn and soda was thick, mixed with the faint scent of the cleaning chemicals I used. The theater was silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system and the occasional creak of the old building settling. The silence felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. As I got to the middle rows, I suddenly noticed something out of place. I looked up and saw a dark shape sitting all the way at the top row. It was just a silhouette because the lights up there were completely out, but it was definitely a person. Not moving, just sitting still, watching me as if waiting. My heart jumped. I froze for a moment, trying to decide if I was seeing things. But no, it was real. Someone was still in the theater, way after the movie ended and everyone else had left. The theater was supposed to be empty. No one was meant to be there except me and my manager, who was supposed to lock up once all the cleaning was done. But here was this person sitting quietly in the dark. I couldn't see their face or anything about them except the shape of their head and shoulders. The darkness around them made it look like they were part of the shadows, almost like they were hiding. I tried to focus on my breathing to calm down because panic was creeping in fast. I kept cleaning slowly, row by row, heading up toward that top seat. Every step I took felt heavy. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, and I could hear my own breathing echo off the empty walls. The silence was broken only by the sound of me picking up trash and wiping seats. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe this person had just fallen asleep or didn't realize the movie was over. Maybe they were homeless or someone struggling who found a place to sit for a while. It was a bad part of town, after all, and the theater had seen its share of people struggling with drugs and homelessness. When I finally reached the top row, I spoke softly but firmly. "Hey, the movie's over. You need to leave now." There was no answer, no movement at all. The person just sat there, silent. That silence was the worst part. It wasn't like someone ignoring me or being rude. It was like they didn't even hear me or didn't want to respond. My skin crawled. The fact that they said nothing, didn't move, didn't even blink, made me feel like I was dealing with something I couldn't understand. I took a few steps back down, feeling nervous now. I wanted to call my manager immediately, but as I reached the bottom, I heard a voice behind me say, "You forgot to clean here." It was low, calm, but there was something unsettling about it, almost like the person was right next to me. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. The voice had come from the dark hallway just outside the theater, but when I looked, no one was around. The place was empty again. I didn't wait. I ran out and found my manager in the lobby. I told him everything, trying to explain how I saw the person, how they didn't say a word, and then the voice telling me to clean again when no one was there. We walked back to the theater together, flashlight in hand. Every corner felt darker, colder. When we got inside, the top row was empty. No sign of anyone. No footprints, no trash left behind, nothing. It was like the person had vanished into thin air. I never figured out who that person was or what they wanted. The area around the theater was known for drug activity, and there were rumors of people hiding out in the building after hours. But this was different. The way that person just sat there, silent and still, made it clear they were waiting for something. Or maybe someone. It was one of the creepiest things I have ever experienced. It made me realize how dangerous some parts of the city could be, especially when you're alone in a dark, empty place like a movie theater late at night. The incident stuck with me because it wasn't a story about ghosts or some made-up creature. It was a real person, real danger, and something about the way he behaved felt like he was planning something bad. The silence and the way he didn't respond made it worse than any scream or shout could have been. It was the kind of silence that tells you something terrible could happen if you don't get out fast enough. I've always been interested in history, especially dark, real history. I'm a history major in college, so I know a lot about dangerous people from the past. People who were terrifying not because they had supernatural powers, but because of what they did to others. One figure I find chilling in a very real way is Grigory Rasputin, a man whose life was so twisted and brutal it's hard to believe he actually existed. Rasputin's story is terrifying because it's grounded in reality. He lived in Siberia, one of the most dangerous and remote places on Earth. It's a harsh land, cold and wild, and not many people dare to stay there for long. But Rasputin managed to not just survive there. He manipulated the Russian royal family, convincing Tsar Nicholas II and his wife to let him stay close. This wasn't just a simple court advisor or a holy man. Rasputin used his influence to control people, pushing the Tsar to make decisions that led to the downfall of the entire empire. The more I read about Rasputin, the more I realized how dark his story really was. He wasn't just a mystical figure or a holy man. He was involved in a sex cult and committed terrible crimes, including abusing members of the Tsar's family. There are stories that suggest he may have raped the Tsar's daughter multiple times, which is horrifying on its own. He didn't act like a normal person or a normal leader. He was dangerous and manipulative, using people for his own gain. What makes Rasputin's story even more intense is how hard it was to kill him. When the nobility finally decided to end his influence, they tried everything. He was poisoned with a huge amount of cyanide, shot several times, beaten badly, strangled, and then thrown into a river inside a burlap sack. But when the doctors did an autopsy, they found that none of those injuries were enough to kill him. The poison didn't work, the bullets didn't kill him instantly, and the strangling wasn't successful. He only died because he drowned, and his fingernails had marks showing he fought to get out of the sack before dying. It's a brutal story of survival against impossible odds, but it ended in a slow, terrifying death. That's the kind of horror I'm drawn to, real human horror. The kind that makes you feel afraid, not because of monsters or ghosts, but because of how dangerous people can be when they have power or are desperate. Rasputin's life was a nightmare made of manipulation, fear, and violence, and his death was just as brutal as his life. When I think back to the man in the theater that night, sitting in the dark and silent, I can't help but feel a connection to stories like Rasputin's. Both are reminders that real evil doesn't always show itself with loud noises or obvious threats. Sometimes it's quiet, waiting in the shadows, watching you, planning, and you only realize how dangerous it is when it's almost too late. That night in the theater, I was lucky to leave without any harm, but it changed how I see people in dark places, how I listen to silence, and how I trust my instincts when something feels wrong. Sometimes the scariest things are the ones you can't see clearly. The silent figures sitting in the dark, waiting, watching, and the history of real monsters who walk among us, hidden behind the mask of normal life. I still remember that time in Brazil like it was yesterday, even though it happened years ago. Back then, I was a missionary, dumb and naive. Really, just two young Americans trying to share our faith in a place that was completely foreign to us. My companion and I had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. We were fresh, hopeful, and very eager, maybe too eager to trust people we barely knew. It started when we met a man who looked like he had been living rough for a long time. He was this big, bearded guy with wild hair, clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks, maybe months. I honestly can't say how old he was because his beard covered half his face, and his eyes were sunken under thick brows. When he first came up to us, I thought he was just another homeless person or maybe someone who wanted some money or food. But then he spoke, and to my surprise, he spoke almost perfect English. It caught me off guard, and my companion was just as surprised. It wasn't just the language, either. The way he talked, he had this strange mixture of friendliness and something else. Something off. He told us his name was Bickford. That was the first weird thing. Such a strange name for someone living in the middle of Brazil for over 30 years. He said he was American, had been there for a long time, but I never understood what he was doing so far from home for so long. At first, he seemed genuinely interested in what we were saying. He even asked for a copy of the Book of Mormon. But I quickly noticed that his excitement was less about the religion and more about talking to us, two Americans in a foreign country. We met him several times after that, always in places that felt strange. Not busy areas, but side roads, quiet corners of the city, or on the outskirts where the trees started to grow wild. It was always public, but still remote enough that I felt uneasy. My companion and I talked about him often. We were curious, but cautious. He had this strange energy about him. Something in the way he lied about little things, or how he looked at us sometimes that didn't sit right. But we couldn't put a finger on it. One day, during our weekly meeting with the local church leaders, we told them about Bickford. I remember watching their faces change the moment we mentioned his name. The bishop leaned forward, his voice dropping to a warning. They told us Bickford was known around the area. He was unstable, they said. Every now and then, maybe once or twice a year, he would start bothering missionaries. They warned us to stay away from him. We didn't listen. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe we just thought they were exaggerating. We continued to meet Bickford, but I became more and more uncomfortable each time. There was something sinister behind his wild eyes. His stories never quite added up. He would tell us about his house in the jungle, a place he claimed was peaceful and full of life. He invited us to visit it. I should have said no, but my curiosity got the better of me. The night we went to his house was the worst night of my life. We met him at the side of the road, as usual, waiting patiently in the dark. The streetlights barely reached us, and I kept checking my small flashlight, hoping it would hold up. We waited for what felt like an hour. Then, just when we were about to leave, Bickford appeared. His eyes shone in the faint light, and his smile was wide but cold. We followed him as he led us down a narrow path into the jungle. The jungle was thick, dense with trees and plants that seemed to swallow the little light we had. The path was almost hidden by tall grass and vines. I was stepping carefully, but every few steps I walked right into spider webs that clung to my face and clothes. I hate spiders, always have, and the ones in Brazil were the worst. Big, hairy, and fast. My heart was pounding, not just because of the spiders, but because something felt terribly wrong. We walked for what seemed like forever. My companion was quiet, but I could see his jaw clenched tight, trying to stay calm. Finally, we reached a small clearing. The moonlight revealed a cabin barely standing. It looked like it had been through a storm a dozen times and lost. The wood was rotten, the roof sagging, and the windows broken. No electricity, no plumbing, no sign of a real home. Just a shell of something that once might have been. Bickford welcomed us like we were long-lost friends. He let us inside without a door, just an open frame. The smell hit me immediately. Mold, decay, and something I can't describe, like old sweat mixed with rot. The furniture was destroyed, broken into pieces and scattered. Chairs had been smashed, tables torn apart, trash and debris everywhere. It looked like a wild animal had torn through the place. Then I saw the walls. They were covered, every inch, in frantic chalk writing. The scribbles were messy, but clear enough to read. Most were short sentences, almost like a broken mind trying to confess something over and over again. Jesus will forgive me, but I have to stop. I did it again, with dates next to the words scrawled over and over in different handwriting styles. The worst part was the names. The names of children with their ages and terrible, graphic details written next to them. The words made my stomach twist, and I couldn't stop looking at them, even though I wanted to close my eyes. My companion and I didn't say a word. We tried to focus on other things like the rotting food on the stove or the rats he said he kept in the basement. Rats. Hundreds of them. Just thinking about it made me want to throw up. I kept glancing at Bickford, trying to read his face, but it was unreadable. Calm, like he was proud of what he'd done. The silence between us felt like it was choking the air. I was frozen, my body screaming to run, but my mind was stuck. We finally said we had to go because it was getting late, and I swear I could hear his smile behind us as he reluctantly agreed to guide us back. But then he stopped and said he knew a shortcut. My heart dropped. He started leading us deeper into the jungle, away from the road, into the darkness where no one could hear us. We stopped him, telling him we prefer the path we came by. Thankfully, we managed to find our way back without him, even though I was less afraid of spiders at that point than of what could be waiting in the dark. When we finally reached the road, I remember looking at my companion and knowing without saying it that we both felt the same thing. Relief, shock, and fear so deep it took my breath away. I couldn't speak for a long time. My voice was gone, swallowed by the terror that night. I called our leaders, and they moved us to a new area within the week. Before leaving, we wrote a warning in the area book, telling all other missionaries to stay far away from Bickford. The whole thing felt like a nightmare, but it wasn't. I kept recordings of our meetings with him on a little digital camera, audio only, hidden in my pocket. Listening back, I can hear the fear in our voices, the strange sounds of the jungle, and even the scuffle when I fell near the entrance of his basement full of rats. Looking back now, I realize how lucky we were. That night, we were close to something dark and real, something that could have destroyed us if we hadn't trusted our gut and gotten out when we did. Bickford was no ghost story or legend. He was a broken man living on the edge, hiding terrible secrets in a collapsing cabin deep in the jungle. I don't tell this story to scare people with monsters or ghosts. It's about how real evil can hide in plain sight, disguised as a friendly stranger, and how sometimes you just have to listen to the feeling inside telling you to run, even when you're supposed to be kind and open. That night changed me. It made me realize the world is not always a good place, and some people aren't what they seem. I never forgot the look in Bickford's eyes or the chalk scrawls on those walls. It haunts me still, but it also taught me the value of caution, even when you want to believe the best in everyone. We never saw Bickford again after we left that area, and I hope no one else ever has to. But if you ever find yourself alone with a stranger who feels wrong deep down, trust that feeling. Because sometimes what's hiding in the dark is far worse than anything you could imagine. It was a quiet night in Central California, the kind of night where the air feels a little too still and the stars hang low and bright, but there's a chill that crawls under your skin. My aunt was about 23 then, working late as a bartender at a small, local bar that closed at 1 a.m. The kind of place where the regulars knew her name and the shifts were long but steady. That night, after closing, she was driving home in her old, beat-up sedan through the rural roads that stretch out between farms and empty fields. There wasn't much traffic at all, just the occasional car here and there. She was tired, but not too tired to notice the silence around her. The streetlights were far apart and dim, and the darkness seemed to press in from the edges of the windshield. About halfway through her drive home, she realized her gas tank was dangerously low. So, she pulled off the highway onto a small, lonely gas station. It was the only one for miles, a little rundown place with a flickering neon sign and a few pumps lit by harsh fluorescent lights. It was maybe 2 a.m., and she wasn't expecting anyone else to be around, but when she pulled up to pump number 4, there were a couple cars already there. Just a few, but enough to feel like she wasn't totally alone. The hum of the pumps and the faint smell of gasoline filled the cool night air. She rolled down her window, grabbed the gas nozzle, and began pumping. The night was still and quiet except for the soft clicking sound of the gas hitting the tank. She leaned back against her car, tired from her shift, but relieved she'd made it this far. The radio in her car was off, and the street was silent except for the distant buzz of a flickering street lamp. The cool air hit her skin, and for a moment, she thought about how peaceful it was. Peaceful, but with a strange tension underneath. Something fell off, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Suddenly, the gas station's intercom crackled to life, loud and clear over the night silence. The voice was firm but calm. "Ma'am at pump 4, please see cashier." She froze, looking around quickly. For a moment, she didn't realize the voice meant her. There were several pumps, and she thought maybe it was for someone else. The announcement repeated, louder this time. "Ma'am at pump 4, please see cashier." Now she knew for sure it was her. She pulled the gas nozzle out and closed the tank cover, walking toward the small store. The door jingled softly as she stepped inside. The cashier, a young man who looked a little nervous, was standing behind the counter. His eyes were darting toward the security camera monitors mounted on the wall behind him. He didn't say much at first, but his face told her something was wrong. Then he motioned for her to stay calm. His voice was low and urgent. He told her he'd called 911. He had seen something on the security cameras. A man had crawled under her car while she was outside pumping gas. The words hit her like a cold wave. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. She couldn't believe it. Who would crawl under a car like that? And why? Together, they watched the monitors. The screens showed grainy black and white footage of the gas pumps and the parking lot. On one screen, a figure appeared under her car. The man was crawling low on the ground, moving slowly but deliberately. Then, the footage showed him slipping into the back seat of her car. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. The man was inside her vehicle. She hadn't noticed him when she was leaning against the car just moments before. They stayed inside, watching the footage and waiting. The cashier kept telling her to stay calm, but her hands trembled. The man looked like he had been out on the streets for a long time. His clothes were worn and dirty, and he had gloves on. A pocket knife was visible in his hand on the camera footage. It was terrifying to think what could have happened if she had gotten back into the car without noticing him. Minutes passed like hours until flashing red and blue lights filled the parking lot. 2 police officers arrived, moving quickly but carefully. They approached the car and found the man still inside, trying to hide in the back seat. He was arrested on the spot. My aunt was shaken to her core. The officers checked her vehicle thoroughly, making sure there was no damage, no other surprises. The man was taken away, and the gas station slowly returned to its quiet state. But the feeling of safety had been shattered. She never forgot that night, how close she had come to danger without even realizing it. The memory stayed with her. The flickering lights, the grainy footage on the security cameras, and the sense of vulnerability that hit her in those moments. It was a clear, real reminder that sometimes the scariest things don't come from ghosts or stories, but from people and moments you never expect. From then on, she always checked her car carefully and never took her safety for granted again. The summer we took that long drive down to Florida, my sister and I were just kids, but looking back now, I realize how close we came to disaster. Not once, but twice. We saved our family from what could have been serious injury or even death, though at the time, it didn't feel that way. It was just a long, boring trip with 2 kids trying to survive hours in a car. But those moments stuck with me, and I can still see everything like it was yesterday. The first time was when my sister was barely 2 years old. We had been on the road for what felt like forever. 20 hours of sitting in that cramped car, with the hum of the engine, the flickering lights of the dashboard, and the endless stretches of highway passing by. Our parents had planned this trip to visit our grandparents in Florida, and even though my sister was usually quiet and happy in the back seat, this time she suddenly started crying. Not just a little fussing, but screaming like she was starving. She hadn't been like that at all during the trip. My parents were clearly worn out too. They were tired, tense, and quiet mostly. I remember the car air felt thick like something was wrong outside, but nobody said it. We were maybe 2 hours from our destination when the sky started to change. It was the sick, weird kind of gray and green that I later learned was the color of skies before tornadoes. But there was no warning on the radio. No reports of storms or tornadoes anywhere near us. The roads outside looked normal, but the sky just felt heavy, like it was pressing down on the car. My sister wouldn't stop crying. My parents tried everything, singing, offering snacks, turning the music up, but nothing worked. Then, finally, after hours of her screaming, they pulled over. It was near some empty rest stop off the highway. Nothing fancy, just a few cracked concrete slabs and faded signs. The car shut off, and for the first time in what felt like a day, silence fell, except for my sister's soft hiccups as she calmed down with a bottle. My mom and dad looked exhausted, but they didn't relax. They just sat quietly in the car, eyes flicking to the dark sky. I remember looking out the window and seeing the clouds swirling low and fast. The wind had picked up, and the trees nearby bent like they were struggling to stay upright. We stayed parked there for almost an hour, just waiting for my sister to stop crying and for the sky to clear. Finally, we got back on the road. The next hour was tense but uneventful. The roads were wet from a storm we hadn't seen yet, but nothing dangerous. That's when we took a turn on a main road that would have been our usual route to get to the next town. But that road was gone. I still can't describe how surreal it was. It looked like a bomb had hit it. The asphalt was ripped up, giant chunks thrown aside like pieces of a puzzle scattered on the ground. Trees were snapped in half, their trunks splintered and branches twisted like fingers clawing at the sky. Power lines hung low, some touching the ground, swaying with the wind. The whole scene was so quiet, too quiet. No cars, no people, just destruction. If we had been driving on that road instead of the one we took, we would have driven right into the heart of whatever had torn that place apart. A tornado had hit while we were stopped, somewhere nearby. We were lucky. We avoided it by a matter of minutes or miles. I don't know exactly which. That day, I learned how quickly things can go wrong when you least expect it. My sister's crying, which annoyed everyone at the time, actually saved us. Without that break, we would have been caught on that destroyed road during or after the storm. It wasn't just luck, it was a moment of chaos that forced a pause, and that pause saved us. The second time happened a few years later. We were on the road again, heading to Florida, this time driving through Georgia. I was about 8 years old and sitting in the front passenger seat, trying to stare out the window without making my neck hurt. It was late afternoon, and the rain had been falling hard for what seemed like hours. The road was slick, the sky gray and heavy like before, but this time the rain finally stopped. The wet road still glistened under the fading light. My dad was driving steady, calm as always. I was half listening to the radio, half watching the highway. We were in the right lane, passing an on-ramp where cars were merging onto the highway. That's when I saw it. A sports car, maybe a Fox body Mustang or something like that. It was hard to tell in the dim light. It came flying down the ramp fast, too fast for the wet conditions. Right at the end of the ramp, there was a big puddle of water, like a pool that had collected after the rain. I could see the water shimmering on the asphalt. I didn't say anything right away, just held my breath, eyes fixed on that car. I knew what was coming. The car hit the puddle at over 60 miles per hour and immediately started to hydroplane. The tires lost grip and the whole car spun out of control. It was like watching a nightmare in slow motion. The car spun multiple times across the lanes, sliding sideways and then back again. The driver must have been struggling to regain control, but it was useless on that slick surface. I gasped and my dad heard me. He looked over just in time to see the car come spinning straight toward us. Without missing a beat, my dad slammed his foot on the brake and steered to the left, slowing down just enough to avoid being hit. The car finally flipped over on the median, rolling end over end before landing upside down. The metal crunched loudly, glass shattered, and the car skidded to a stop. For a moment, everything was silent except for the dripping rain and the faint sound of the highway traffic. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out my chest. I kept looking at the wreckage, my dad still driving carefully, eyes sharp on the road. If I hadn't seen that car, if I hadn't made that little noise, my dad wouldn't have reacted in time. We would have been hit head-on by a car spinning out of control at 60 miles per hour. There's no way the car could have stopped or slowed enough to avoid a crash. After that, my parents didn't say much. They just kept driving, eyes focused straight ahead. I felt the tension in the car for miles afterward. We all knew how close we'd come to disaster. Looking back on those 2 moments, it's clear how fragile life can be. The tiniest things, a baby crying, a kid gasping, can change everything. No magic, no luck, just split-second timing and paying attention. Those experiences taught me to always watch closely, to listen, and to never ignore the small warnings life gives you. We could have lost everything in those 2 trips, but we didn't, because we were paying attention when it mattered most, and that made all the difference. It was one of those last days of school when the teacher didn't bother teaching. Instead, she gave us crossword puzzles and mazes to fill up the time. The classroom was quiet except for the soft scratching of pencils on paper. Everyone seemed bored, and a few kids were whispering quietly, trying not to get caught. One girl near me was talking about horror movies with her friend. The teacher, Mrs. L, must have overheard because after a while, she suddenly asked if we wanted to hear a story. Not just any story, but one about her own life, about her father, who was an axe murderer. We all froze for a moment. You don't hear that kind of thing every day, especially from your teacher. But the class was tired, restless, and honestly curious. We nodded and said yes. She looked around the room, then started telling us the story quietly, like she didn't want to remember it too much, but knew she had to tell someone. She explained that her father had a serious mental illness. Sometimes he would lose control, snap in a way that made him dangerous, even to his own family. For years, nobody knew just how bad it was until one night, everything came to a terrifying point. It was a night when Mrs. L was still a kid, about 10 or 11 years old, and the family was at home like usual. She described it as a night where the air felt heavy, almost like something bad was about to happen, but no one could say what. Her father had been acting strange all day, pacing, mumbling, not talking to anyone. At some point, he just snapped. He grabbed an axe from the garage. It wasn't just any axe. It was the kind that looked heavy and sharp enough to split wood easily. The kind that made you think twice if it was in the hands of someone unstable. He came into her room late at night. She said she was lying in bed, trying to pretend she was asleep, but she could hear him breathing hard and the sound of his footsteps getting closer. Then came the sound of the axe hitting the wooden door, chopping and chopping like he was trying to break it down. Each strike shook the whole door frame. The noise was terrifying, the wood splintering with every hit. She said her heart was pounding so hard she thought it would burst. She wanted to scream, but her voice stuck in her throat. She was frozen, hoping maybe he would just go away. But the door started to give in. The wood cracked, splintered, and then finally broke enough for him to reach his arm inside. She told us how she could see the shape of his hand with the axe handle, trying to push the door open. Just when she thought it was all over, her mother suddenly burst into the room. The teacher's voice got softer here, like the memory was hard to say out loud. Her mother had heard the noise and came running from another part of the house. She tackled her father to the ground before he could reach her daughter. The struggle was loud, shouts, grunts, the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Her mom grabbed the axe from his hands during the fight and slammed the door behind her, locking herself and the teacher's younger sister in the bathroom. Mrs. L said she didn't wait around. She ran to the window, which was small and high up. She had to push and squeeze to get out, scraping her arms and legs on the frame. When she finally got outside, it was dark, and she ran as fast as she could to the neighbor's house, pounding on the door and begging for help. The neighbors called the police, who arrived quickly. Her father was arrested and sent to jail, but that wasn't the end. After some time, he got out, and shortly after, he killed himself. Mrs. L said it was a relief, but it also left a hole in the family. They never really talked about what happened again. After she finished, the classroom was silent. Nobody spoke for a long time. The story felt heavy, like a cloud hanging over us. It was the kind of story you don't forget because it wasn't some made-up horror movie tale. It was real, and it happened to someone we knew. Mrs. L didn't say it for attention or to scare us. She said it because sometimes people need to hear that bad things happen, but people survive. And when you survive, you keep going, even if the memories never really go away. My mom never told me this story when I was little. I think she didn't want me to worry for no reason. She kept it to herself for years. I only heard the full story when I was much older. It was about a time when we lived in a small townhouse after my parents split up. I was around 4 years old, and my mom, my 2 sisters, and I stayed there before moving in with my stepdad. It was just a short time, maybe less than a year, but something happened that still haunts her to this day. The house wasn't very big. It was one of those older homes that looked normal but felt a little off when you were inside, like it held secrets you couldn't see. The paint was peeling on the window frames, and the wood floors creaked in certain spots. The yard was fenced but overgrown with weeds, and the back door, which led to the small backyard, had an old rusty lock that never seemed to work right. Mom always said she wished she had fixed that door properly, but moving around so much, money was tight, and things like that weren't a priority. Mom had her own bedroom at the back of the house. It wasn't big, just enough for a bed, a small dresser, and a nightstand. The windows in her room faced the backyard and the side alley. She used to keep her bedroom door closed, especially at night. But after this night, she kept it locked, something she had never done before. The house felt safe during the day, but at night, when the wind blew just right, the sounds of creaking and rustling made her uneasy. One night, late in the middle of winter, the kind of cold where the window panes frost over, Mom was sleeping in her bed. The room was dark except for the dim light of the street lamp outside, filtering through the curtains. The house was quiet except for the occasional ticking of the old clock in the living room and the faint sound of cars passing by in the distance. She had been drifting between sleep and wakefulness when something stirred her fully awake. At first, she thought she had heard the back door creak open. Maybe the wind had blown it, or maybe one of us kids had gotten up. But then, there was a sound coming from inside her room, the soft shuffle of footsteps on the wooden floor. It wasn't like any of us moving around. It was slow, careful, but deliberate. Her heart started pounding fast, but she didn't want to wake us or make a scene if it was nothing. She stayed still, barely breathing, trying to convince herself it was just her imagination. Then she felt a cold chill run down her spine when she saw the shadow of a man standing near the corner of the room, close to the window. The man wasn't talking or moving much. He was just standing there, his face almost hidden in the darkness. Mom later described him as looking tired but dangerous, with clothes that looked dirty and worn out like he hadn't bathed in days. She couldn't tell if he was armed, but something about him made her blood run cold. She gasped quietly, and that small noise was enough to break the silence. Suddenly, adrenaline took over. She wasn't sure if she should scream or run, but she knew she had to act fast. The man turned toward her quickly, maybe surprised, maybe scared, and that gave her just enough time to jump out of bed. She moved fast, heart hammering, legs shaking but strong with fear. She didn't stop to think. She had to get to her kids. She wasn't sure if she wanted to fight the man or just run, but either way, she needed to be away from him. She ran toward the hallway, then toward our room where my sisters and I were sleeping. The man, realizing he had been seen, bolted toward the back door. Mom heard the door slam behind him as he fled into the cold night. She locked the door immediately and grabbed her phone, which was in the kitchen. The house felt empty, but not safe anymore. The quiet was different, tense like something bad had settled in. She called the police and waited outside the house on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, shaking but trying to stay calm. The officers came quickly, but by then, the man was long gone. They searched the house and the yard, but didn't find any sign of him. What the police did find, though, was clear. There were marks around the back door, scratches, dents, and broken locks, signs of forced entry. The man had broken in, maybe hoping to rob the place. But when he found out we were home, or at least when he saw Mom awake and alert, he ran off. The police told Mom that this sort of thing was sadly common in small towns. Burglars would pick houses they thought were empty, especially ones with signs of being quiet or alone at night. They figured this guy thought the house was empty, maybe because he'd been watching it, and when he came face to face with Mom, he freaked and took off. The scary part for Mom was knowing that the man was inside the house while we were all asleep in the next room. She never woke any of us because she didn't want to scare us and didn't know what might happen if the man stayed longer or got violent. After the police left, Mom checked the locks on every door and window. She bought new locks when she could and even put a wooden bar against the back door for extra security. At night, she would lie awake, listening for any sound, always waiting for the worst. We never heard much more about the man. The police didn't catch him. They told Mom he probably ran off and never came back because it wasn't worth the risk. Still, the fear stayed with her. She never wanted to talk about it around us because she didn't want us to feel unsafe in our own home. But as we got older, she slowly told us bits and pieces, making sure we understood to be careful but not terrified. Looking back, I realize how brave she was that night. She was just a mom, alone in a strange house with 3 little kids asleep nearby, facing a stranger breaking in. She could have been hurt or worse, but she protected us. I don't think I would have been that brave. That night changed how Mom saw the world. She learned to trust her instincts, to be ready to act, and to never take safety for granted. The house wasn't just a home anymore. It was a place that needed guarding. And even though we moved on and left that house behind, that memory stayed with her, a reminder of how close danger can get when you least expect it. Sometimes, when I think about that night, I still feel that chill she must have felt. The thought of a stranger, silent and close enough to touch, lurking in the dark of your own home is something no one forgets. It's a reminder that safety is fragile and that sometimes the scariest things are the real ones, not made up in stories or dreams. Mom never wanted to scare us with this story, but now that I know it, I understand why she kept it quiet. It was her way of protecting us, not just from danger, but from fear. But the truth is, we all face things that shake us to the core. What matters is how we stand up afterward. That's the story Mom never told me at first. The night a stranger broke into our small town house and ran off scared because a mom was awake, ready to protect her kids at all costs. That night started like any other normal night. My friend, Claire, had been talking to this guy she met on Tinder. They'd only known each other a little bit, but things seemed to be going well. She told me later that their date went smooth, dinner, a few drinks, good conversation. He seemed normal enough. Nothing sketchy, just a guy she thought she might want to see again. When Claire got back to her apartment, the guy came with her. Since it was late, she didn't want to make him drive home, so she let him crash on the pull-out bed in her living room downstairs. The pull-out was old and creaky, but did the job. She figured she'd go upstairs to her bedroom and get some sleep, letting him rest there for the night. About 10 or 15 minutes after she'd gone upstairs and started to get comfortable, she heard knocking on her bedroom door. At first, she thought it was weird. She wasn't expecting him up here so soon. The knocking wasn't soft, it was loud, almost urgent. Then he started making noise, trying to get her attention. Claire called out, asking what he wanted, but the guy was already rattling on about how hungry he was. She felt a bit strange, but figured maybe he just wanted a snack or something. She got up, put on her slippers, and went down to the kitchen to see what she could find. She opened the fridge, rummaged through the cupboards, trying to find something quick, a sandwich, some chips, anything really. But every time she suggested something, he shook his head no. Not chips, not sandwiches, not leftovers, not fruit. He was picky and pretty insistent that she come with him to get something. At first, Claire thought maybe he was just being difficult or tired, but as minutes passed, his tone changed. It got more demanding, almost like he was pushing her to do something she didn't want to do. She started feeling uncomfortable. She barely knew the guy, and he was acting different. Not just tired or hungry, but weird, like he was trying to control the situation. She tried telling him she was going to bed and that she'd get him something in the morning, but he wouldn't let it go. He kept repeating that he was starving and that she should come out with him. Claire felt herself getting irritated. She didn't want to deal with this nonsense, especially not at midnight when all she wanted was to sleep. To get him off her back, she gave in and agreed to go outside with him. When they stepped out onto the street, the cold night air hit her like a slap. The street was quiet, only the sound of distant cars and the occasional dog barking. The guy stopped and looked over at her. He said he'd seen someone hiding behind the curtains in the living room window. At first, Claire thought he was messing with her or trying to scare her, but the look in his eyes was serious. He told her he wanted them both to get out of the apartment to be safe, just in case whoever was hiding there was dangerous. That's when Claire's blood ran cold. She didn't notice the curtains on her living room window moving or anything suspicious inside. She told him there was no way anyone could be hiding there. But the guy was insistent, and honestly, after the way he'd acted, she didn't want to argue. They stayed outside on the street for what felt like forever, just standing there, both of them watching the apartment. The guy pulled out his phone, shining a flashlight up toward the window. Claire could see the curtain twitching slightly, like someone or something was definitely moving behind it. Her heart was pounding so loud she was sure the guy could hear it. She kept looking around, expecting someone to jump out or run off into the shadows, but the street stayed silent. No cars, no footsteps, just the faint hum of the city at night. The guy stayed calm, but you could tell he was on edge. He kept telling her to stay close, watching every window and doorway. Claire wanted to call the police, but her phone was upstairs, and she wasn't about to go back inside. Eventually, after what seemed like hours, they both decided it was best to leave the area and go to a nearby 24-hour diner. The guy said he wanted to call the police from there and explain what was going on. Claire agreed. She just wanted to be somewhere safe, out of that apartment that suddenly felt like a trap. At the diner, they sat in a corner booth, the kind with high walls that gave them a little privacy. The guy made the call, and Claire watched the door carefully the whole time, scanning the parking lot and street outside. The diner was bright and warm, a stark contrast to the cold, quiet street they had left behind. The police came quickly, but by the time they arrived, the figure behind the curtain was gone. They searched the apartment, checking every corner, every closet, and behind every curtain. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence anyone had been inside. Still, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The police suggested it might have been someone just looking to scare or prank her, but that didn't explain why the guy was so sure and why the curtain had moved. In the days that followed, Claire changed all her locks and installed new curtains. She never let anyone stay over after that night. The guy she had gone out with? She never heard from him again. Sometimes, late at night, Claire says she still looks out that window and wonders if someone was really there, watching her all along, waiting for the right moment to come back. And she knows one thing for sure. She'll never ignore the feeling that something is wrong again. That night taught her a simple truth. Some people might seem normal, but you never really know what's hiding behind the surface, and sometimes it's better to trust that gut feeling and walk away before it's too late. I was 19 at the time, living what I could only call a very unlucky life, filled with strange, scary moments that I never asked for. This one night, though, stands out the most. It's the night I think I might have been targeted by a serial killer. It sounds crazy, even to me, but every detail still sticks in my mind like it happened yesterday. I was a student at a university far from my hometown. Because of that, I rented a small room in student accommodation near campus. The contract was almost over, just a few days left before my last exam. I figured I'd study hard the night before to cram everything in. I was the kind of guy who procrastinated and then tried to fix it all in one go. It wasn't smart, but it worked sometimes. So, around midnight, I headed to the university library, planning to pull an all-nighter. The library was usually open 24 hours, so it seemed like the perfect place to focus. When I got there, though, I found the doors locked and a sign taped to them. Emergency maintenance. Closed until further notice. I stared at that sign, feeling my stomach drop. My whole plan was ruined. I stood outside for a few minutes, trying to figure out what to do. I needed somewhere quiet and safe to study, but I didn't want to go home because it was too far. Then I remembered there were some hotels nearby. I pulled out my phone to check, but every hotel in the area was expensive, way more than I could afford on a student budget. After scrolling through the list, I saw one that was cheap. It looked old and a little run down, but the price was right. I walked towards it, following a long, dark street. The silence around me was thick. The only sound was my footsteps on the cracked pavement. There were no streetlights for most of the way, just pitch-black shadows stretching on both sides. I was nervous. My heart beat faster, and I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to appear. But nothing did, just a quiet night. After about 30 minutes, I saw a faint light at the end of the street. It was the hotel. The building was old, Victorian style with peeling paint and a crooked sign swinging above the entrance. I told myself, at least I'll be safer inside. I forced a smile and pushed open the heavy front door. Inside, the lobby was dim and smelled like old wood and damp carpet. There was a small reception desk, but no one was there. I rang the bell a few times. Nothing. Then, from the top of a narrow wooden staircase, I noticed a tall man watching me. His face was shadowed, but I could tell he was staring directly at me. He was thin, with a pale complexion and dark eyes that didn't blink much. I asked if he worked there. He said no, he was just another guest. But then he started asking me weird questions. Where I was from, why I was here, what I was doing. I answered, but kept it vague because something about him felt off. He didn't smile, and his voice was quiet but firm, like he expected answers. After a few minutes, he walked back upstairs. I heard banging and shouting for a bit before the Real receptionist appeared from the back room. The receptionist looked tired and distracted, but helped me book a room. I paid and took the old brass key, heading upstairs. The hallways were narrow and poorly lit, the carpet threadbare. I noticed the door next to mine had some scratches and marks around the handle. It looked like someone had tried to force it open before. I unlocked my door and went inside. As I unpacked my stuff, I started hearing knocking on the door next to mine. Then a loud voice shouting something I couldn't understand. My heart jumped into my throat. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just some drunk person or a fight between guests. Then there was knocking at my own door. I froze. When I opened it, the strange man was standing there again. His eyes were cold, and his expression didn't change. He asked if I was alone. I lied and said a friend was coming over soon. He asked if he could come in. I refused. That's when things got terrifying. He tried to push his way inside, but I slammed the door and locked it. My hands were shaking as I leaned against the door, listening. After a few minutes, the knocking stopped. I thought maybe he had gone away. For about 10 minutes, everything was quiet. I pulled out my phone and started playing a YouTube video. I wanted something to drown out the silence and calm my nerves. The video had a guy talking calmly, and I focused on that to keep from panicking. Suddenly, there was knocking on my door again, but this time it stopped quickly. Then I heard footsteps moving to the door next to mine. More knocking, then loud banging. The walls shook as if someone was trying to break through. I was frozen in place, my breath caught in my chest. Screaming and shouting came from the other side. I didn't know who it was, but I could tell they were in trouble. The banging kept getting louder until it felt like the door would collapse. I later learned that the man was a suspect in several murders. He was carrying knives and machetes, ready to kill whoever was behind that door. The person next door was lucky to be alive. The police came soon after and took everyone's statements, but the man had already run off. After that night, I never stayed in a cheap hotel again, no matter how tempting the price. The fear I felt is something I can't put into words. It's not like in movies where the hero fights back easily. That night, I just wanted to survive and make it through to the next morning. Looking back, I realized I should have called the police when the man first showed up. But I was young and scared, not sure if it was the right thing to do. I thought the receptionist and the other guest had everything under control. They didn't. The next day, the person who had been attacked came back to the police station to give more information. He said the man was a prime suspect in previous crimes. How the man didn't hurt him more seriously is still a mystery. Since that night, I've been careful. I don't take chances anymore. That night taught me something important about trusting my instincts and knowing when to get help. It was the closest I ever came to losing my life, and I'm grateful to still be here to tell the story. The morning had started out like any other trip. They had driven out early to that quiet rural area, the kind of place where the roads are dusty and cracked, and the fields stretch on forever with no one around for miles. The kind of place you visit when you want to get away from the noise of the city, the traffic, the stress. It was supposed to be a simple walk with the dog, a chance to stretch legs and breathe fresh air. She was middle-aged, a calm woman who loved her dog more than anything. The dog was a medium-sized, energetic mutt with a thick coat and endless curiosity. They had stopped by a farm she'd never been to before, a working farm along quiet country road. The barn was old, weathered wood with rusted tin roofing, sitting just off the gravel driveway. The fields around it were dotted with cows and a few horses, the animals quietly grazing or standing lazily in the sun. It looked peaceful. They pulled the car off to the side of the road, doors left open. The dog was on a leash, but as soon as the door opened, it jerked free and bolted. She didn't have time to think. The dog was gone, darting past the barn and down toward the back. She called out, her voice soft but urgent. The dog didn't stop. It ran faster, faster, pulling her with it, until they reached the far edge of the property where the barn ended and something else began. That's when she saw it, the dung cistern. It was a huge, open pit, sunk deep into the ground and filled with dark, thick liquid waste. The kind of thing farmers use to store animal manure before spreading it on fields as fertilizer. The edges were high, made of concrete, and the top rim sat well above the ground. It wasn't obvious from the road or even near the barn. You had to be close to see it, and there were no warnings or fences. The dog had slipped past the barn and landed right at the edge of this pit. She screamed for the dog to stop, but it was too late. The dog tumbled in. The thick, black liquid swallowed it up. She saw the dog's frantic paws, trying to claw out, but it only sank deeper. Panic set in. She dropped the leash and moved toward the edge. The smell hit her first, a heavy, choking stench of rot and decay. The fumes were strong and sour, the kind of smell that sticks to your skin and makes your eyes water. She tried to find a way to climb down, but the sides were smooth, wet with slime and muck. No way to get a grip. She called to the dog again, but the animal was weak, struggling in the heavy, suffocating sludge. Something inside her broke. Without thinking, she leaned over and jumped in after the dog. That moment was the start of a nightmare she could never have imagined. The liquid was cold and thick, pulling her down like quicksand. The fumes wrapped around her throat, burning her lungs, making it impossible to breathe. Her legs sank deeper, the muck filling her boots and weighing her down. She tried to reach for the dog, who was barely moving, trapped and slipping beneath the surface. She reached out, grasping the dog's soaked fur. The animal whimpered weakly, a small sound lost in the heavy silence around them. She held on tight, but panic was overwhelming. She tried to climb out, but the walls were slick and high. Her arms ached from strain. Minutes passed like hours. She felt her strength fade. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the toxic fumes stealing the air from her lungs. Her head dipped onto the surface of the sludge again and again. She fought to stay awake, to keep holding the dog, but the thick liquid was unforgiving. Eventually, her body gave up. She lost consciousness, sinking deeper. The dog, too weak to fight anymore, slipped under with her. Later that day, the farmer returned. He noticed the car, left open and empty by the side of the road. Strange, he thought. No people in sight. He looked around, calling out softly. When he found the cistern, the horror of what had happened became clear. The search ended in tragedy. No one could save them. The thought of it was unbearable. A woman and her loyal dog trapped in a pit of waste, slowly overcome by toxic fumes and drowning in the dark, suffocating liquid. It was a death that seemed almost unimaginable, a mix of desperation, love, and tragedy. That story stayed with me, haunting my thoughts whenever I considered how fragile life is and how quickly things can go wrong in the most unexpected places. The farm, the quiet road, the dog chasing after adventure, a moment that turned into a slow, terrible ending. I think about the edges of that pit, how slick and unforgiving they must have been, how the woman's last thoughts might have been of her dog, and how her body must have weakened with each breath filled with poison air. The way the dog struggled, too, a small life lost alongside hers in the dark liquid. No screams, no witnesses, just silence and the overwhelming weight of tragedy. It's a reminder that some dangers hide in the quietest places, and that sometimes, no matter how much love or courage there is, the odds can be mercilessly against you. I hope that pit is better marked now, fenced off, a warning for anyone who passes that way. Because no one should ever die like that again. It's a story that doesn't fade, a silent warning carved deep in my mind about how fast a walk in the country can turn into a nightmare. And that's the real horror. It was a few years ago when my mom told me about a terrifying experience that happened to one of her close friends. It wasn't some made-up horror story with ghosts or monsters, just something real, raw, and frightening enough to haunt someone forever. This story has stuck with me because of how real it felt, how easily it could have been me or anyone I know. Her friend was driving alone on a highway somewhere in Portugal. Not just any highway, but one of those long, empty roads where the landscape around you is nothing but stretches of dry fields and scattered trees, with no town or gas station in sight for miles. The kind of road where if your car breaks down, help feels like a distant dream. It was the middle of nowhere, really. And it was late in the day, close to dusk, so the light was starting to fade, but not yet dark. She was heading back home after a day visiting some family, tired but alert enough to focus on the road. The air was warm, the kind of dry heat you feel in the summer when the sun is still up but fading. She'd been driving for quite a while, watching the road ahead, when she noticed a car coming up behind her. At first, it seemed normal, but as the car drew closer, it started driving suspiciously close. Not just close, but way too close. Almost like the driver was trying to intimidate her or pressure her to move faster. The car hovered just inches from her rear bumper, then suddenly zipped past her on the left. At that point, she felt a chill in her stomach. It wasn't just careless driving. Something about the way the car moved was off. As the other car sped ahead, she kept it in her sights through the rearview mirror. It didn't slow down, and instead of disappearing, it stayed near her side. Then, out of nowhere, the car made a sharp turn to the right. The driver swerved hard, cutting directly in front of her. She had only seconds to react. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Her grip on the wheel tightened. She slammed on the brakes, trying to avoid a collision. The tires screeched against the asphalt, the car fishtailing as she struggled to keep control. But the sudden move was too much. She lost control. Her car spun off the road and crashed hard against a tree. The impact was violent enough to throw her forward, the airbags deploying instantly. The sound of metal bending, glass shattering, and her own breathing heavy and sharp filled the car. Then, everything went black. When she came to, she didn't know how long she'd been out. Her head throbbed painfully, and her body ached in places she couldn't even reach. The air around her smelled of dust and crushed leaves. She was still inside the car, which was tilted awkwardly against the tree. The doors were jammed, and she couldn't move much. Panic set in as she realized how isolated she was. No cars passed by, no people anywhere in sight. Then, from somewhere in the distance, she heard voices, rough but calm, speaking in Portuguese with a Brazilian accent. It was a small group of people coming to her rescue. They were strangers but spoke softly, telling her to stay still, not to move. They said they were calling an ambulance and that help was on the way. She felt a strange mixture of relief and fear, knowing she was in trouble but not alone anymore. The people stayed with her, speaking quietly, trying to keep her calm, but the pain and shock were overwhelming. She passed out again, drifting into darkness, with their voices fading away. Time passed, but she couldn't tell how much. When she woke up again, it was to the sound of different footsteps and voices. A new group of people had arrived, checking her condition, helping her the best they could. The ambulance came after what felt like hours, the flashing lights finally breaking the silence of that lonely stretch of road. Her husband arrived soon after, rushing to her side, his face full of worry and tears. She told the ambulance workers and the police about the first group that had been there before, the Brazilians who rescued her. But when the police searched the area, they said no one had been there. They found no sign of the people she described. It was like they had vanished into thin air. Then came the worst part. When she and the police checked her car's trunk, everything was gone. Her laptop, camera, important documents, everything stolen. It was clear that while she was unconscious, someone had ransacked her car. The items she had packed for her trip, all taken. For days afterward, she replayed the incident in her mind. One thing kept coming back, the feeling that the car which caused the crash wasn't just driving recklessly. It had been following her for some time, creeping closer and closer, driving unervingly close to her car, like a predator stalking prey. That car wasn't there by accident. It was hunting her. There were no ghosts, no supernatural forces, just the terrifying reality that someone had been watching her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That someone had forced her off the road in the middle of nowhere, left her there helpless, and robbed her of everything while she was down. After the crash, she never drove on empty roads like that again. She always made sure someone knew where she was, and she never let her guard down. That day changed her forever. The quiet highway that once felt like a peaceful drive became a reminder of how fragile safety really is when you're all alone. The police never found the driver who caused the crash or the people who supposedly rescued her first. The case went cold, but she never forgot the look in that car's driver's eyes, the coldness, the intent to harm. It was a brutal reminder that sometimes danger doesn't come from monsters or myths, but from real people who choose to hurt others for reasons you may never understand. The world isn't always safe, and sometimes it takes just one moment to turn your life upside down. She's lucky to be alive, but those miles of empty road will forever hold the memory of that day. The day a stranger tried to destroy her, and a shadow of help slipped away like smoke. That night still plays in my head, like a video stuck on repeat. I wasn't even there, but my friends told me everything, and I wish I had been, if only to stop it. But part of me is relieved I wasn't too. I'm going to tell you what happened, as best as I remember from what they told me, and I want you to understand how real and scary this was, without any weird supernatural stuff, just pure, raw fear and danger. It all started because a bunch of girls from my friend group decided to have a night out. We usually met up for drinks or a movie, but this time they wanted to hit the local gay club. It's one of those places where the music's loud, the lights are flashing, and people dance and laugh and let loose without caring who's watching. I can't even remember why I didn't go that night. Maybe I had work early the next morning, maybe I was just tired or anxious. Honestly, at the time, I didn't think much about it. But later, when they told me what happened, I kept wishing I had been there. They all got ready and met up, excited to have fun. The club was packed, the air thick with heat and sweat, and the smell of alcohol mixed with perfume. The music thumped so loud you could feel in your chest. My friends hit the dance floor, moving with the crowd, smiling and chatting. Then, one of them spotted something strange, something that didn't fit. In the middle of the dance floor, there was a girl who looked completely out of place. She wasn't dressed like anyone else there. Everyone in the club usually wore tight, colorful clothes, fancy shoes, makeup, styled hair. The whole vibe was flashy and loud. But this girl, she wore sweatpants, a plain t-shirt, no makeup at all, and her hair was just pulled back in a sloppy ponytail. She had a backpack on, which was weird because no one brought bags onto the dance floor, especially not backpacks. My friend said she looked dazed, like she wasn't fully there. And worst of all, there was a very large man with her, pressing his body against hers, grinding on her. She just stood there, not moving or reacting, almost frozen. My friend who saw this first said she felt sick watching it. She tried to get closer and asked the girl if she was okay, but the man immediately stepped in. He spoke for the girl, loudly insisting he was her boyfriend, that she just had too much to drink, and that everything was fine. But my friends weren't convinced. The man's eyes were cold and hard, and the girl didn't say a word. She didn't even try to pull away. It was like she was trapped, like she couldn't fight back. At that moment, my friends didn't know what to do. They stayed close, watching, making sure the man didn't hurt her. The club was so crowded and the music was so loud that it was hard to get help or draw attention. Nobody wanted to jump in and cause a scene, especially with a guy that big. So they waited, hoping the situation would change. After a while, the man left the dance floor to get a drink at the bar. That's when my friend got the chance to talk to the girl again, more quietly this time. The girl whispered that she felt extremely out of it, that she thought she had been drugged. She said she didn't know the man at all and that she wanted to leave. She was scared, shaking slightly, unable to stand firmly on her own. My friend didn't hesitate. She took the girl's arm and started moving toward the exit. But just as they were about to leave, the man came back. He was furious, his face twisted in rage, and he screamed at my friend, accusing her of stealing his girl. The shouting drew attention from everyone nearby. The man got so close he was practically breathing in my friend's face, his anger so intense you could feel it like a physical force. Then, without warning, he swung his fist at her. My friend barely dodged the punch, stumbling back but staying on her feet. Luckily, someone had already called security, and a guard rushed over, pulling the man away before he could hit again. The security guard was firm, pushing the man toward the exit, but the damage was done. The fear was thick in the air. My friends managed to get the girl out safely. She was still dazed and scared, barely able to explain what happened. All she said was that the man had been following her around town all day, watching her, waiting for a chance. No one could get a full story, but it was clear this wasn't some drunk misunderstanding. It was a planned, dangerous situation. The worst part was what happened after. The bar staff told my friends that they couldn't do much except kick the guy out. The police came after the call, but said they couldn't arrest him without more evidence. They told my friends all they could do was be on the lookout. The guy was still out there, somewhere, free to do this again. The whole thing left us shaken. My friends kept replaying the night over and over, wondering if they could have done more. I kept wishing I had been there. What if I had been? Would I have been able to help? Could I have stopped him before it got violent? The feeling of helplessness is what stays with me most. We all learned a hard lesson that night about how dangerous people like that man can be, how easily someone can slip into a crowded place and take advantage of someone who's vulnerable. It made me realize how important it is to watch out for each other, to trust our instincts, and never to ignore that sinking feeling when something feels wrong. I'm telling this story not to scare you just for the sake of it, but to remind you that these things happen. They happen to people you know, in places you might think are safe. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to step in, to listen, to act, to make sure someone else gets home safe. That girl in the club, she might still be out there trying to heal from that night. And that man, he's probably still out there, waiting for another chance. But now, we're all more aware. We're watching. We're ready. Because no one should ever be left alone in a crowd with someone who wants to hurt them. That night changed us. It showed us the ugly truth behind the bright lights and loud music the masks people wear in public. It showed us how important it is to be brave, even when it's scary. And it reminded me, every single day, how precious and fragile safety really is. About 2 years ago, in the spring, one night around 9 or 10, I was just sitting in my room playing Xbox with my buddies online. It was one of those nights where everything felt normal and quiet, and I wasn't really expecting anything unusual to happen. The kind of night when the only sound in the house is the clicking of buttons and the voices of my friends chatting through the headset. My mom is a photographer, and she has one of those big, expensive cameras with a massive lens and all the settings you can imagine. She's pretty serious about it, always carrying it around the house or outside when the light is good. She loves shooting nature and animals, especially when they come close to the yard. The backyard of our house backs up to some woods, so we get all sorts of wildlife from time to time. That night, I was deep in a game, trying to hold my ground in a firefight with my friends, when I suddenly heard this strange noise coming from the doorway that leads out to the backyard. It wasn't just one voice or movement. It It was a bunch of people, my family, all standing around, talking quietly, but in a way that sounded like they were all staring at something. I could hear footsteps and the occasional shuffle, the kind of sound you make when you're all frozen in place, but curious about what's out there. I paused my game and stood up, walking over to the doorway. I looked out, but the backyard was pitch black except for the dim glow of a few porch lights that barely lit the area around the back door. The fence at the edge of the yard blended into the darkness, and beyond it, the trees looked like giant shadows. I walked outside, and as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw my dad standing there. He wasn't talking, just staring intently at the fence line. When I asked him what was going on, he just nodded toward the fence and said, "There's something out there." My mom was already out there, just a few feet from the fence, crouched low with her big camera in hand. I could tell she was trying to get pictures, but she kept fiddling with the camera and muttering something about the flash not working right. She stayed very still, barely breathing, with her eyes fixed on the dark woods just beyond the fence. The air was cool, but there was this tension that made it feel colder, like the kind of quiet before storm. The backyard, normally full of sounds like crickets or rustling leaves, was dead silent. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Suddenly, my mom's camera flash went off, a sudden burst of light cutting through the blackness. The flash lit up the yard in a bright, white glare for just a split second. And right in front of my mom, standing on its back legs like it was trying to get a better look, was a bear. The bear was huge. It must have been at least 6 feet tall, standing upright, with thick dark fur that shimmered in the flash. Its eyes reflected the light, glowing a faint yellow, and its mouth was slightly open, showing its sharp teeth. The bear was motionless, just standing there like it was frozen in time, watching my mom as she crouched near the fence. The flash faded, and the yard went back to darkness, but by that time my mom was already moving fast. She backed away from the fence, gripping her camera tightly, but clearly shaken. She didn't even try to take more pictures. Instead, she turned around and hurried toward the house without saying a word. The bear didn't chase her, but it stayed near the fence for a moment longer before disappearing silently into the woods. I stood frozen where I was, heart pounding, staring at the spot where the bear had been. My dad put a hand on my shoulder, but didn't say anything either. We just stood there for a long time in the dark, listening. After a while, the sounds of the house felt comforting again. The hum of the fridge, the distant TV from the living room. But outside, the woods still looked endless and unknowable. That night, nothing else happened. The bear never came back, but every time I went near the back door, I felt like it was still watching me from the shadows. I don't think I've ever seen my mom that scared. She's always calm and collected with her camera, even around wildlife. But that night, whatever she saw stopped her in her tracks. She never tried to take pictures of the backyard after dark again. The next day, I looked up information about bears in our area. Turns out, it was springtime, the time when bears come out of hibernation hungry and ready to roam. It made sense why one would wander into our yard, but seeing it up close like that, standing on 2 legs, was something else entirely. It wasn't just an animal passing by. It felt like an encounter where we were both sizing each other up. That night stuck with me. It changed how I think about the woods behind our house. It's not just trees and animals out there. Sometimes it's something big and powerful that you don't want to meet, especially when you're standing still with nothing but a camera flash to keep the darkness away. My wife had gone to her parents' house that evening. Her dad had been sick lately, and she was staying there to help out for a while. The house was usually full of noise and people, but tonight it was quiet. Her parents were both out running errands or at the hospital, and nobody else was home. She had her own set of keys, so she let herself in through the front door. It was late, the kind of quiet where even the small sounds in the house seemed louder than usual. As soon as she stepped inside, she didn't walk all the way into the house. Instead, she stopped just inside the door in a small room that held the computers. It was the first room off the entryway and had a large desk along one wall with 2 computers sitting on it. The light from the computer screens gave the room a faint glow in the dark house. She sat down, logged on, and started browsing the internet, trying to relax after a long day. The room had a window looking out to the front yard, but outside it was mostly dark except for some streetlights far down the road. After a minute, her cat wandered into the room. This wasn't just any cat. It was her own cat, a big old tabby that had been part of her life for years. The cat was famous for being completely chill, super friendly, never scared of anything, and very patient. He loved to sit on the porch and let squirrels throw pecans at him, and he'd just lie there, not even moving an ear. He was the kind of cat you could trust completely. But tonight he was different. The moment he walked in, he stopped cold by the door that led deeper into the house. His fur was standing on end, his back arched slightly. He was growling low and hissing softly but clearly, the way a cat does when it feels threatened or scared. His eyes were wide, and he was staring right at the hallway that led further into the house. He was standing right between my wife and the rest of the house, like he was blocking her path. My wife knew that this was not normal at all. The cat was always calm, but now he was acting like something was seriously wrong. She stayed where she was, watching the cat carefully. He kept growling, his tail flicking back and forth like he was ready to attack something unseen. She stood up slowly and reached down to pick him up. Usually, he was happy to be picked up, but even then, he didn't stop growling. His claws were digging slightly into her arms, and he kept hissing softly. That was when she decided to get out of the house. She didn't want to walk any further inside, and she certainly didn't want to be alone with a cat acting like that. Holding him close, she stepped back out the door and closed it quietly behind her. The night air was cold and still. The street was empty, and the houses around were all dark. She took a deep breath and looked down the street. Almost immediately, she spotted a police car driving slowly down the road. It was one of those regular patrol cars, its headlights sweeping over the empty street. She waved at it, hoping the officers would stop. They pulled over right in front of her parents' house. She told the officers what had just happened, how she'd come inside, how the cat was acting strange, and how she'd left because of it. The officers listened carefully and then told her to stay with them in their cruiser while they went inside to check the house. My wife nodded, trying to stay calm, but feeling a growing sense of unease. The officers moved cautiously, walking around the house and checking every door and window. It wasn't long before one of them called out that the back door was wide open. This was strange. Her parents were very careful about locking doors, especially at night. The house was in a safe neighborhood, and the back door had always been locked tight. The officers explained that they had been patrolling the area because there had been reports of a serial rapist spotted nearby. They were watching the street to keep an eye out for anything unusual, which was why the police car was there in the first place. That news hit hard. The peaceful street, the quiet house, the relaxed cat, all of it suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. Her cat's behavior made sense now. He must have sensed something, maybe heard someone moving around or smelled a stranger nearby. The cat's instincts were telling him something was very wrong. The officers searched the rest of the house carefully. No one else was inside, and nothing was missing, but the open back door was enough evidence that someone had been there. The fact that the door was left wide open in a house that never left doors unlocked showed that whoever had been there was careless or in a hurry. My wife stayed in the police car, her cat at her lap, still tense and alert. The officer stayed with her until more units arrived and began a neighborhood search. The idea that someone dangerous had been so close, maybe inside the house, was terrifying. The police advised her to stay somewhere else that night, just to be safe. Her parents' house, normally a place of comfort, felt different now. The house where she had spent so many quiet evenings was no longer a safe space. That night, she stayed with a close friend and didn't sleep well. The cat, usually calm once indoors, stayed restless and alert, keeping a watchful eye on every shadow. The officers continued patrolling the neighborhood for days after, warning neighbors to lock every door and stay vigilant. The thing that made this experience stay with her wasn't the police or the open door. It was the way her cat, a calm and loving animal, had sensed danger long before anyone else did. Animals have a way of noticing things humans miss. Sounds, smells, even feelings. That night, the cat's fear was the only warning anyone had that something was very wrong. In the end, The police never caught the person who had tried to get into her parents' house. The serial rapist was still out there somewhere, hiding in the quiet streets, waiting. My wife never went back to that house alone again, and the cat never stopped guarding the door to the rest of the house, even when no one else was around. The quiet street stayed quiet, but the memory of that night stayed loud and clear. The kind of fear that comes not from a story or a nightmare, but from something real, something close enough to touch, and close enough to change everything. Years ago, my husband worked for an industrial laundry company, a job that most people wouldn't think twice about. It was just a big place where hospital linens, care home sheets, and all kinds of medical laundry were brought in to be cleaned on a massive scale. The company was responsible for making sure that everything that went through their machines was not only clean, but sterile. No bacteria, no viruses, no biological contaminants of any kind. The processes were harsh and intense. Massive industrial washers, boiling water, heavy bleaching chemicals. It was the kind of cleaning that had to be done right without any mistakes. The health of patients depended on it. He worked in the head office, so he didn't see the actual machines or laundry carts much. But he knew the routines well enough, and he understood the scale. Hospital laundry wasn't like regular laundry. It was heavy-duty stuff. Sheets soaked with blood, bodily fluids, the kind of things no one wanted to think about. But the workers in the plant handled it every day. It was their job, and they took pride in doing it well. One day, something happened that no one could have expected. The entire plant came to a standstill. It was a normal day like any other when a scream ripped through the processing area. A horrible, chilling scream that echoed through the whole factory. My husband heard about it later from some of the workers who had witnessed what happened. The scream came from one of the laundry workers who had just pulled a laundry cart from the boiling and bleaching cycle. The carts were huge metal frames loaded with linens, and after going through the washers, they moved along conveyor belts to be sorted and dried. That day, when one of the workers lifted the sheets off a particular cart, they found something no one ever should have seen. Tangled up in the sheets was the body of a newborn baby. The body had been through the boiling, bleaching, and washing cycle. It was cooked, as the workers put it. The skin was shriveled and almost unrecognizable, the little limbs curled up stiffly. It was horrifying. The laundry workers were devastated. Most of them weren't prepared for anything like this. Their job was hard enough without dealing with something so tragic and sickening. The whole plant was immediately shut down. Police were called, and the entire operation was put on hold while investigations began. My husband said the atmosphere in the office changed overnight. People who had been chatting casually one day were now quiet, somber, and visibly shaken. The news spread quickly. The laundry company was hit with a public relations disaster. They had always been seen as a reliable part of the hospital supply chain, but now they were at the center of a tragedy that was deeply unsettling. The media had a field day, and people began to question how something like this could happen. The laundry company tried to explain that their machines and procedures were safe and strict, but that didn't change the fact that a baby's body had gone through those washers. The investigation eventually traced the laundry back to a local hospital. What they found there was heartbreaking and made the whole incident even more tragic. It turned out that the baby had been stillborn, but the parents had spent time saying their goodbyes in the delivery room. After that, the baby had been covered with a blanket and placed in the cot in the hospital room. The parents and some nurses assumed the body had been taken to the mortuary as usual. But one nurse, likely a new or tired staff member on shift that day, had failed to notice the baby still lying in the cot. When it was time to clear the room, she grabbed all the linens from the cot and the bed, unknowingly scooping up the baby wrapped in a blanket. She dumped everything into the laundry hamper trolley like she would with any other dirty sheets, never realizing what was inside. The other nurses and hospital staff assumed the body was already in the mortuary. No one had realized the baby had been mistakenly sent to laundry until the horrifying discovery at the industrial plant. The hospital was devastated. The parents were destroyed by the news when it finally came out. The hospital faced intense criticism and scrutiny from the public and health officials. For For the laundry company, the impact was severe, but it was clear they were not at fault. Still, many of the laundry workers who discovered the baby's body needed counseling, and some eventually quit because they couldn't deal with what they had seen. To prevent anything like this from ever happening again, the laundry company changed their procedure. Before, the staff would tip all the laundry from hampers or carts directly into the industrial washers. Now, they had to carefully empty each hamper by hand and inspect it, making sure nothing out of the ordinary was mixed in. It added time and effort, but it was necessary. The whole event left a mark on everyone involved. My husband said that even people in the office who didn't directly see the body or work in the plant still felt the weight of what had happened. It was a stark reminder of how fragile life can be and how small mistakes can have devastating consequences. The tragedy stayed with the laundry workers and hospital staff for years after, and the story was a cautionary tale about the importance of care, attention, and respect for human dignity, even in the most routine tasks. The company moved forward, but nothing could erase the memory of that day or the lives affected by it. The people who worked there changed their practices forever. It wasn't just about laundry anymore. It was about making sure such a heartbreaking accident never happened again. I'll tell you about something I saw that I still can't get out of my head. It happened years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years back, when I was visiting a friend in New Rochelle, New York. I wasn't from there, just passing through, so I didn't know the area too well. We were at this local bar on a weekend night. The place was pretty crowded, but not overly loud, just enough noise for a good vibe. My friend and I were catching up, having a few drinks, enjoying the night. I remember the air was crisp, not too cold, just that kind of early spring night where you can still sit outside with a cigarette without freezing. At some point, we both stepped outside for a smoke. It was one of those bars with a little patio out front, not much seating, just enough space for a handful of people to stand and chat. The street was calm, a couple of cars parked along the curb, and there was this hill up the road that curved sharply at the top. I had noticed it earlier, but didn't pay much attention, just a normal street feature. I was leaning against the rail, and my friend was beside me, when out of nowhere, a car came flying past the bar. It didn't just roll by casually, it came blazing through a red light at what had to be well over 60 miles an hour. It was one of those moments where your brain immediately knows something is wrong, but it still can't process it fast enough. The car wasn't just speeding, it was reckless. The driver didn't slow for the curve at the top of the hill. Instead, he crossed over the double yellow line and barreled into the opposite lane. That's when the other car showed up, coming the right way down the hill. The two cars collided head-on with a force so strong it shook the ground beneath us. I could see their back ends lift up a little before slamming down hard. The sound of metal crunching was deafening, but what came after that still haunts me. The car that was driving correctly, the one coming down the hill legally, erupted into flames instantly. The fire started at the front, but quickly spread, licking up the hood, through the windshield, and into the cabin. My heart stopped. For a second, I just stood frozen. Then something kicked in. I ran back inside the bar, grabbed the fire extinguisher hanging by the door, and yelled for the bartender to call 911, telling him there had been a terrible accident just outside. My voice was loud, panicked, but I didn't waste a second. When I got back outside, my friend and a few of the patrons had already moved closer to the scene, but no one dared get too close because the flames were growing fast and the heat was intense. I tried to spray the fire with the extinguisher, aiming at the flames, but it barely made a dent. The chemicals from the extinguisher mixed with the burning fuel, and the fumes were horrible. It was like the air was thick with poison, and I felt my eyes sting. The worst part, the part that's burned into my memory like a scar, was the woman trapped inside the burning car. I could hear her screams clearly, and they were the most gut-wrenching sounds I've ever heard. She was screaming in pain and terror, and the sound echoed around the street, making everyone step back even further. I'd heard about people dying in fires before in movies and stories, but hearing it happen for real, so close, was a whole different level of horror. Her voice was desperate, broken, fading as the fire consumed the car. We were powerless. The fire was too strong, the heat unbearable. All we could do was stand back and watch, our faces lit by the flames, the smell of burning rubber and plastic filling our noses. The metal of the car twisted and melted in places. I remember seeing the windows crack and explode from the heat, the sound sharp and sudden. It felt like time slowed down, every second stretched painfully long. Minutes passed before the fire department arrived. The firefighters moved quickly, but the fire had already taken its toll. They sprayed the blaze with hoses, and it hissed and steamed as the water hit it. After what felt like hours, the flames finally died down. The car was a blackened shell, smoldering in the street. The police showed up too and started taking statements. They let us back inside the bar to warm up and calm down. Everyone was shaken, but no one spoke much. I kept replaying the screams over and over in my mind. I couldn't get the image of the burning car or the woman inside out of my head. I'd never seen anything so terrible. The next day, I looked up the accident in the news. The reports said the woman who died was driving home late from work, just a block from her house. She was young, possibly newly married or maybe a new mother. They didn't have all the details. The other driver was described as a wealthy man who was drunk. He survived with only a lost leg, which seemed almost cruel compared to the woman who died. The reports didn't say if he faced serious consequences. I never found out because I left town soon after. That night changed something in me. I realized how fragile life is and how quickly things can go from normal to a nightmare. I can still see the flames, hear those screams, and feel the heat from that fire like it happened yesterday. It was a harsh reminder that some accidents aren't just random. They're caused by choices, by carelessness and selfishness. I don't tell this story often. It's too raw, too real. But every time I think about it, I remember that woman, and I hope her memory reminds others to be careful, to respect the road and the lives of those around them. Because one reckless moment can destroy everything. It was late in the evening when my friend noticed something wasn't right. She had just finished a late shift at work, the kind of job that leaves you tired but relieved to be heading home. The streetlights were flickering as she walked down the sidewalk, the quiet hum of the neighborhood making everything feel calm, at least on the surface. She had her keys clenched tight in one hand and her phone in the other, ready to call someone if she needed to. The first sign was subtle, a shadow that didn't belong, shifting behind the bushes near the corner. She stopped for a moment, blinking hard, trying to convince herself it was just a stray cat or the way the wind made the leaves move. But then she saw it again, a figure crouched low, hiding behind the thick hedge across the street, barely visible in the dim light. Her heart skipped. She told herself it must be a coincidence, maybe someone walking their dog. But she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching her, tracking her every step. She sped up, every muscle in her body tense and ready. Her breath came out fast and sharp, the cold air hitting her face as she kept moving forward. The closer she got to her house, the louder her heartbeat felt. The sound seemed to echo in her ears. She glanced behind her. The shadow was there again, not far off, staying hidden, blending into the darkness of the bushes lining the sidewalk. She tried to stay calm, but the panic started to build, pressing against her chest like a weight. Her legs suddenly remembered something. The countless sprints she'd forced herself to run over the past year. She had started running because she wanted to be strong, to push her limits. She never imagined it would save her life. But right now, that training was all she had. Without thinking, she broke into a run. The cold wind bit at her skin as she sprinted down the street, heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She could hear footsteps behind her, soft, careful, but definitely following. She didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. The world around her blurred as she focused on one thing: get to the safety of her home. Her breath came out in ragged gasps, but she kept pushing, muscles burning. Every second felt like an eternity, every step bringing her closer to safety. When she reached her front door, hands shaking, she fumbled with the keys, her fingers trembling so much she almost dropped them. Finally, the door clicked open. She slipped inside and slammed it shut behind her, locking it immediately. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of the figure standing across the street, just beyond the light's reach. He was watching, waiting. She felt frozen, the adrenaline still rushing, her mind racing. She grabbed her phone and called the police, her voice low and steady despite the fear bubbling inside. She explained what was happening, gave them her address, and stayed on the line until she heard the distant sound of sirens approaching. The minutes felt like hours as she waited, every creak of the house making her jump. Then, she saw the flash of police lights outside. Officers moved quietly, carefully, surrounding the house. They didn't want to spook the man, knowing how dangerous he could be. Soon, they arrested him. When they searched him, they found condoms, handcuffs, and a sharp knife hidden in his jacket. The police said the evidence pointed to something very bad. The man was linked by DNA to several rapes that had happened in the area over the past few months. It was chilling. My friend sat in her living room, shaken but alive. She kept thinking about how close she came to being hurt, how if she hadn't been able to run fast enough, she might have been another victim. The thought was terrifying, but also made her grateful. Grateful for her training, for her quick thinking, for the police who showed up just in time. In the days after, she found a new strength inside herself. The fear didn't disappear completely, but it became a part of her story, a reminder that she had fought back and won. She started telling people about what happened, hoping her story might help someone else, to remind them to trust their instincts, to stay prepared, and to never underestimate the power of being ready. She never forgot the shadow in the bushes, the pounding footsteps behind her, or the cold edge of fear that night. But most of all, she never forgot the feeling of crossing the threshold of her home, safe at last, and knowing she had outrun something truly dangerous. I was working the evening shift at a small gas station in a quiet neighborhood, one of those places that mostly sees a steady but slow trickle of customers, people stopping in for a quick snack, a soda, or a pack of smokes. The kind of place where the most excitement you get is when the trucker from the highway stops for gas, or when some kid comes in after school looking for chips and candy. The shift was dragging on like usual, the clock ticking past 9 p.m., with only the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the faint sound of cars rolling by outside to break the silence. The store was mostly empty when the doorbell jingled sharply, signaling a new customer. I looked up and saw a man standing in the doorway. He was disheveled, his clothes dirty and torn in places, and his face was pale. What caught my attention immediately was the deep gash on his forehead, blood still fresh and dripping down near his eye. His eyes looked glazed over, almost lost, and his whole posture screamed confusion. It was clear he wasn't all there, like his mind was somewhere else or had just been shaken up. I didn't hesitate. Usually, I'm told to stay behind the glass shield at the register, especially at night, when it's just me in store. It's a rule meant to keep us safe, some kind of barrier between us and whatever trouble might walk in. But seeing the man like that, obviously hurt and lost, I couldn't just ignore him. I stepped out from behind the counter and moved closer, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. He didn't say much at first, just mumbled, his words slow and hard to understand. When I asked if he was okay or needed help, he shook his head like he couldn't make sense of where he was. He said he didn't know how he got there or what had happened. I looked around the parking lot and the street outside the gas station. No cars wrecked, no signs of crash or an accident. It made me think maybe he'd fallen somewhere nearby and wandered into the store looking for help. I called 911 right away, telling them about the man's head injury and how disoriented he was. I gave her location and told them I'd stay with him until help arrived. While I waited, I kept an eye on him, making sure he didn't pass out or try to leave. His confusion didn't lessen. He was scared, staring around like he was trying to find something or someone, but he couldn't focus. The ambulance arrived quicker than I expected. 2 EMTs came inside, their flashlights cutting through the dim light. They checked his vital signs, asked him a few questions, and looked closely at the gash. One of them said it looked like it might be a fractured skull underneath, and told me it was serious enough to take him to the hospital immediately. The man was put on a stretcher, strapped in carefully, and taken away with a police officer following behind. The rest of the night passed quietly after that. I went back behind the register, locking the door behind me as usual and keeping the glass shield between myself and whoever might come in next. I stayed alert, the image of the man with the bleeding head burned in my mind. It felt strange to see someone so broken and lost in a place like that. Usually the people who come are just tired or bored, not truly scared or injured like that. A few hours later, around 1 a.m., the same two police officers came back. They came into the front door, nodding at me as they passed by, stopping to buy some coffee and snacks. They were talking quietly between themselves, and I caught snippets of their conversation when they thought I wasn't listening. One of them said something about the man I helped. Apparently, it wasn't just some random guy who had fallen and hurt himself. The man was actually a dangerous criminal. The officers said he had been hit with a baseball bat by a neighbor while trying to break into a little girl's bedroom. The man had been wanted for serious crimes, rape and murder, in 2 other states. The injuries he had weren't from an accident or a simple fall, but from someone trying to stop him before he could hurt anyone else. I sat behind the glass shield, gripping the counter tightly as the officers left. My hands were shaking a little, and my heart was still racing from the news. For the first time that night, I felt the full weight of how close danger had been. If I had stayed behind the counter like I was supposed to, I might not have noticed the man's condition as clearly. But if I had gotten any closer, I could have been at serious risk too. That night changed how I worked. I never left the safety of the register area again, no matter what. The rule about the glass shield felt more real than ever. There's a reason it's there. I learned that sometimes the people who come into your store might not just be lost or hurt. They could be running from something worse, and you have to keep yourself safe first. It's a hard lesson, but one I won't forget. It was probably mid-90s, maybe 94 or 95, back when cell phones were still a luxury, and anyone who worked a job like mine relied on one of those little rectangular pagers clipped to your belt. Mine was black, beat up, scratched along the edges, but it worked. It was part of the job. I was a tech on call all the time, working in the audio-visual field, setting up gear, fixing equipment, responding to emergencies at hotels, conference centers, event halls. Clients didn't care if it was midnight or 4 a.m. If a mic wasn't working or a projector wouldn't turn on before some big CEO was set to speak, they wanted it fixed now. That was the life. So the pager was always with me. It buzzed and beeped like it had a mind of its own. Usually just numbers. A client or an office calling from somewhere. You'd see the number, remember who it was if you were lucky, and find a phone. If they added 911 after the number, though, that meant urgent. That meant drop what you're doing and find a payphone, no matter where you were. Most of the time, it wasn't life or death, just someone panicking over a microphone battery or a blown speaker. Still, you took the 911 seriously. This particular day, I was driving westbound on I-4, leaving Orlando behind me and heading towards St. Petersburg. I'd done that drive more times than I could count. It was a stretch of highway I knew well. Long and dull in places, citrus groves and flat open land, scattered towns like Lakeland, Plant City. It was mid-afternoon, sunny, the kind of Florida day where the heat gets trapped under your skin and your shirt sticks to your back, even with the AC on full blast. I had a cup of gas station coffee in the cup holder, lukewarm and bitter. Then the pager went off, buzzing, sharp and sudden. I glanced down and saw a number I didn't recognize. No name I could place. But what made me take notice was the 911 tag at the end of the digits. Someone wanted me to call back. Now, I pulled off at the next exit. It was somewhere just outside Plant City, not quite rural, but not really suburban either. The kind of in-between place where time felt slower. There was this old truck stop, a one-story building with faded white paint, and a red Coke machine out front. The kind of place that had a few trucks out back, maybe a couple beat-up pickups parked on the side, and a tired-looking woman behind the counter who probably knew everyone in a 10-mile radius. I parked, stepped into the building, and felt the cool slap of ASC on my face. It smelled like fried food and coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. I asked the girl at the counter for change, just a couple quarters, and she handed them over without saying much. I walked toward the payphones lined up on the far wall. There were 4 of them in a row, all silver and black with tangled cords and plastic directories yellowed from years of fingerprints. I picked the 3rd one, dropped in a quarter, and punched in the number from my pager. It started ringing. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3, 4. It just kept ringing. No answer, no voicemail, just the hollow sound of a line that didn't want to be picked up. I started getting annoyed. Who pages someone with a 911 and then doesn't answer? I remember muttering something under my breath, shaking my head. That's when I heard it. Another phone ringing. Not in my ear, but behind it, in the room. I turned my head. 2 phones down from me. One of the other pay phones was ringing. An actual incoming call. Loud, old-fashioned bell sound that echoed through the small building. I froze for a second, let go of the handset I was holding, and it clicked back into place. The ringing on the other phone stopped. I stared at it, walked a couple steps over, lifted the receiver. No sound, dead line, but something made me look at the little white sticker above the keypad, the one that listed the phone's number. I squinted, read the number out loud in my head. Then I dug my pager out of my pocket and checked the number again. It was the same, digit for digit, except for the 911. The number someone had paged me from was the exact number of this payphone, the one that had just rung. My stomach turned a little. It felt like the air in the room got heavier. I looked around. There was no one there, just the girl behind the counter who had gone back to wiping down the same part of the counter like she was stuck in a loop. I walked over and asked her if anyone had used the payphones recently. She gave me a weird look and said I was the only person in the store in the last hour. No one else had come in or out. That didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. I hadn't even been inside for 5 minutes when the phone rang. I didn't know what to do. I left the store, sat in my car for a minute trying to shake the feeling. It wasn't fear exactly, but it was close. More like confusion that had crawled into my skin and made a home there. I wasn't the type to spook easy. I'd been in plenty of sketchy situations, but this wasn't someone following me. This wasn't a broken lock or a guy in the alley. This was something weird, something I couldn't explain, and it wasn't done yet. I got back on I-4 and headed west, tried to push it out of my head. It didn't work. The whole thing kept turning over and over in my mind like a puzzle with no solution. Who paged me? How could the call have come from a payphone I used to try and call it back? Why was the number the same? Why didn't anyone else see anything? I must have driven about 10, maybe 12 miles when I noticed the brake lights. A line of them, all red and glowing in the distance like a warning flare. Traffic slowed, then stopped. I inched forward. My window was down now, and I could hear the sirens. High-pitched, fast, cutting through the afternoon heat. I saw flashing lights, red, blue, yellow. Then I saw the wreckage. It looked like a bomb had gone off. There were 4 vehicles, what was left of them. One was a small white sedan that had been crumpled nearly in half. Another was a pickup with its front end torn open like a can of soup. A tractor trailer lay across the highway, jackknifed, its trailer busted open. Huge steel beams were scattered across the asphalt like fallen towers. They had torn through one of the cars like knives. Paramedics were rushing around, troopers waving traffic to the shoulder, and a small crowd of stunned drivers had gathered nearby. I pulled over instinctively, parked on the shoulder, and got out. I don't know what made me walk toward the wreck. Habit maybe, or guilt, or something else. I told one of the troopers I was trained in basic first aid and asked if I could help. He didn't even look at me, just waved me past and kept shouting into his radio. But there wasn't much I could do. Not really. The damage was too severe. The people involved, it had already happened. It was already done. Later, the news said 1 person died instantly. Another was airlifted out, critical condition. The tractor trailer had lost control coming around a bend. The steel load hadn't been secured right, and when the driver hit the brakes to avoid a merging car, the whole load shifted. Crushed 2 vehicles in seconds. Happened at exactly the time I would have been passing that part of the highway if I hadn't stopped. If I hadn't pulled over in that little truck stop to answer a 911 page that led to a phone that called itself. That stuck with me, more than the wreck. More than the blood or the mangled cars or the blank faces of the people standing around. It was the thought that if I hadn't gotten that page, if I had just kept driving like I always did, I would have been right in the middle of that crash. My little compact car against all that steel. I wouldn't have stood a chance. I never figured out who sent the page. I tried calling a number again later that night from home. Just static. Disconnected. I asked around at work. No one knew anything. I even called the pager service to see if they could trace the source. They couldn't. Said it just showed as a regular page. Nothing odd about it. But there was nothing regular about what happened. Over the next few weeks, I kept thinking about that moment. That sound. The second ringing phone. The identical number. I played it over in my mind 100 times. I tried to come up with explanations. Maybe someone accidentally dialed the number. Maybe it was a cross line, a glitch, some kind of fluke, but none of it made sense. Sometimes, things happen that don't have an explanation. No ghosts, no voices, no glowing lights, just a page, a sound, a pause, and a decision that changes everything. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe it was timing, or maybe, just maybe, something out there nudged me off that road just long enough to avoid what was coming. I don't scare easy. I've seen a lot. I've lived through close calls. But this wasn't about fear. It was about something bigger, something quiet, something that didn't want me on that highway at that moment. And I listened. I still think about it sometimes, usually when I'm driving alone on a long stretch of road, watching the horizon blur in the heat. I'll look at my phone, now a sleek little device with a million apps, and remember that old pager. That one message, that stop in Plant City, that empty store, that ringing phone. Who or what wanted me to stop that day? I'll never know, but I'm still here, and that's enough. It wasn't the scariest thing I'd ever heard in my life, but it stuck with me in a way few stories do. The kind of thing you can't help but picture over and over, even when you're trying not to. My dad told me about it years ago, and every time I pass one of those fancy gates in the woods near our hometown, I can't help but see it again in my head. What that night must have looked like for the guy who lived through it. He didn't die or anything, but I swear, I'd rather take a beating than go through what he did. Just the thought of it still creeps me out. My dad's been a firefighter for decades now. He's seen plenty of rough stuff, car crashes, house fires, even a couple suicides, but he rarely talks about the calls that really shake him. This one, though, he told me in detail. Maybe because there were no ghosts or monsters, no big explosive ending. Just a man, drunk and bleeding, stuck and helpless in the dark with nothing but his own thoughts and the slow ticking of the night. It was one of those houses you don't really notice unless someone points it out to you. Big place, hidden back in the woods off a narrow two-lane road with hardly any shoulder. Long, paved driveway. Electric gate with black steel bars and spikes on top. Decorative but sharp. The kind of gate that makes it clear you're not welcome if you weren't invited. It didn't scream danger, but it wasn't friendly either. I'd driven past it a few times, especially back in high school, when we'd kill time going down all the back roads. We called it the rich people zone. Big yards, winding driveways, and lots of trees that blocked your view of the houses themselves. The guy who lived there, I'll call him Darren, wasn't someone I knew personally. My dad only knew him through the job. Apparently, Darren had gone out drinking with some old friends that night. Bar downtown, probably shot the shit for a few hours, nothing out of the ordinary. He got a ride home, responsible enough for that. But when he got dropped off in front of his own gate, he realized he didn't have the key fob for it. Normally, you just call your wife, right? Or walk up and knock on the door. But here's where things started to go sideways for him. Darren was pretty drunk. That's a detail my dad stressed a few times. Not just buzzed, really drunk. And drunk logic is its own kind of logic. In his mind, he figured it was too late to wake up his wife. Maybe he didn't want to deal with her getting mad. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he thought she wouldn't hear her phone anyway. Whatever the reason, he made a decision that would cost him the whole night. Instead of trying to wake her, he decided he'd just climb the gate. From what I was told, he took off his coat, slung it over the spikes to try and cushion them, and started climbing. He made it most of the way up too, but when he went to swing his leg over the top, his foot slipped and gravity took over. One of those decorative black iron spikes stabbed clean through his thigh. Not just a graze or a little puncture. It went deep. My dad said it missed the femoral artery by inches. Pure dumb luck. The weight of his body pulled him downward, and the spike kept him there, hooked like some piece of meat on a skewer. He was stuck, couldn't climb up, couldn't pull himself off. His other leg dangled, just barely brushing the ground, but he didn't have enough leverage to push himself up or swing down safely. He tried, of course, probably tried for a long time, struggling, twisting, maybe even screaming for a while until he realized what could happen if his wife heard and opened the gate remotely. That's the worst part, if you ask me. See, the gate wasn't the kind that swings open. It slid sideways on a motorized track. So she woke up and decided to check her phone and noticed a missed call, or heard a noise and just opened the gate from inside the house without knowing. The metal would have moved sideways, with Darren still hanging on it. The spike that was through his leg would have been dragged with the gate, and it would have taken a big chunk of his leg with it. Probably killed him right there, or at the very least left him crippled for life. He must have realized that after a minute or two of yelling. Must have played it all out in his head and then just gone quiet. So there he stayed, hanging there, all night. My dad said when they got the call the next morning, it came from the wife. She'd woken up, maybe around 6 or 7, noticed he wasn't in bed, walked around the house, checked her phone, nothing. She looked out the window, and there he was, still hanging there, slumped over the top of the gate, arms limp, blood soaking through his jeans, one shoe missing. It probably didn't even look real at first, more like a mannequin or some Halloween prank. The fire department got there fast. My dad was one of the first on scene. They couldn't just pull him off. He was still conscious, moaning, eyes glazed over like he hadn't fully processed anything in hours. He was in shock, obviously, and cold. That was the other thing. This all happened in early spring. Not quite freezing, but definitely cold enough to make the night feel 10 times longer. His skin was pale, lips cracked, sweat dried into his face like salt lines on a rock. My dad told me they had to use a metal saw to cut the spike off. It took time, too, because they didn't want to jostle him too much and risk more damage. He just hung there while they worked, barely talking, mostly just groaning and flinching with every vibration of the saw. The medics kept pressure on the wound and tried to keep him calm. It took at least half an hour to get him free. Then they got him on a stretcher and into the ambulance. He survived, yeah, but his leg was a mess. Torn muscle, nerve damage, stitches up and down the whole thing. Months of rehab, and all because he didn't want to call his wife. I've thought about that story a lot over the years. At first, it was just the gross out factor that got me. Imagining the spike going through his leg, picturing the blood dripping down onto the cold ground, the way his pants probably stiffened up with dried blood and sweat, the pain. But after a while, it wasn't the wound that stuck with me, it was the silence. The hours of darkness with no one around. The way time must have crawled. How he probably kept thinking, any minute now she's gonna wake up. Any minute, over and over. Watching the sky go from black to that dull, colorless, early morning gray. Listening to the birds start to chirp. Feeling the wind shift. Maybe even dozing off in little bursts only to jerk awake from the pain. And what if it had rained? What if she had opened the gate without looking? What if no one found him until it was too late? It's not a ghost story, but it haunts me. A guy who had everything, money, a big house, a family, and in one dumb, prideful moment, nearly bled out just a few feet from safety. It's easy to make fun of, I guess. You picture a drunk rich guy stuck on his own gate and you chuckle. But then you think about what it would actually feel like. How heavy your body would become after hours of hanging. How your muscles would scream, then go numb. How the metal would dig deeper every time you shifted. How you'd second guess every sound you heard, praying it wasn't the gate coming to life. You'd be too scared to yell, too tired to move, too cold to think straight. Just you and the slow, endless night. My dad said he didn't sleep right for a few nights after that call. He kept thinking about how they found Darren's fingernails scraped along the top of the gate, like he tried to pull himself up over and over. There were little bits of fabric caught in the spikes, blood soaked into the brick pillars on either side. It wasn't the worst scene my dad ever saw, but it was the kind that stuck in his brain. I think it stuck in mine, too, even just hearing about it secondhand. Funny thing is, we never found out what happened after that. My dad said they didn't get called back. Darren was probably in the hospital for a while, maybe did physical therapy, maybe had a long talk with his wife about communication and priorities. Maybe he learned something, Maybe not, but that gate stayed the same. Every time I drove past it after that, it looked just like before. Strong, clean, sharp on top. No bloodstains, no dents. Just sitting there quietly, like it hadn't nearly torn someone apart. But I remembered, every time, and I never forgot to double-check my keys. Years ago, when I was about 8 years old, my family lived in this big old house that sat kind of on the edge of a small town. The house itself was weird. Old wooden floors that creaked under your feet, tall ceilings with cracks in the plaster, and a basement that was cold and dark, always smelled a little musty, and gave off this strange vibe that made my skin crawl sometimes. We had lived there for a couple of years by then, and although the town wasn't far away, the house felt isolated because it was near woods and fields with very few neighbors close by. At that time, the school district in our town was going through a big mess of changes, restructuring they called it. It meant that even though my older brother and I were only a couple of grades apart, we went to totally different schools and rode different buses. My brother caught a bus that was packed with kids from a different part of town, and I had to catch another bus that left later than his. This setup left me in a weird position. I was always the last person to leave the house in the mornings and the first person to get back in the afternoons. Because of that, my parents made me responsible for checking the house each day. I was supposed to make sure all the lights were off, the doors were locked, and everything looked okay before I went out or after I got back. It felt like a lot of responsibility for an 8-year-old, but I took it seriously, mostly because I didn't want to get in trouble. I would check the living room, kitchen, all the bedrooms, and especially the basement door before leaving in the morning. The basement was the one spot I was always a little uneasy about. The door was a heavy, old wooden door at the bottom of the main hallway, with a tiny window in the middle of it that let a little light from the basement bulb shine through if it was on. One morning, right before I left for school, I walked down the hall and noticed something strange. The basement door was open a crack, and the light inside was on. I knew for sure I hadn't left it that way, so I went down and flipped the switch off, then carefully closed the door and pushed it shut so it wouldn't swing open on its own. That should have been the end of it, but I still felt kind of weird about it. It didn't make sense how it could have been open and the light on if I was the last one to leave. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I had just forgotten to check it the day before or something. The house had a lot of people coming and going sometimes, and maybe someone else had been down there. I didn't want to bother my parents about it. When I came home that afternoon, I saw the same thing. The basement light was on again, and the door was open just like it had been that morning. My stomach dropped. I thought maybe he had messed up and forgotten to check it that morning, so I wanted to turn off the light and close the door again. But this time, something was different. As I reached the top of the basement stairs, I froze. Down at the bottom, just barely lit by the weak light from the hallway, I saw a tall, shadowy figure standing still. It was a man, I could tell by the shape, but his face was hidden in the dark. I felt a cold wave rush over me. My heart pounded so loud, I thought it would burst out of my chest. I was terrified. I slammed the door shut as hard as I could, then grabbed some boxes nearby and shoved them against the door, hoping that whatever was down there couldn't get through. I ran straight to my room and locked the door behind me. I hid in my closet for what felt like hours, not daring to make a sound or even breathe too loud. I didn't tell anyone in my family what I saw. I was sure it was some kind of ghost or monster, something no one would believe. Even though part of me wanted to scream and run out of the house, I stayed quiet and tried to pretend it never happened. For months after that, I kept an eye on the basement door. Every morning and every afternoon, I made sure it was locked tight and the light was off. Sometimes I thought I saw shadows moving in the corners of my eyes, or I'd hear weird noises, creaks, faint footsteps, the sound of something shuffling around down there. But I never saw the figure again. I told myself maybe I had imagined it, or maybe it was just a trick of the light and my scare mind. Then about a year after that day, things took a strange turn. My mom and her boyfriend noticed that small amounts of money had been disappearing from the house. At first, it was just a few dollars here and there, like change missing from a jar or a couple of bills gone from a wallet. But over several months, it added up to almost $1,000. My mom was confused and worried because no one in the family was talking about money being lost or spending it secretly. One night, they decided to check the house carefully with flashlights. They looked around every room, every closet, and even the attic. They wanted to find out if someone was breaking in or if there was some kind of secret hiding spot where the money had been left and stolen from. That's when they found it. The small hole on the outside of the house, hidden behind some old bushes near the basement wall. It was just big enough for a person to squeeze through. From there, a narrow crawl space ran underneath the house and led right up to the basement. It was dark, tight, and dusty down there, with spider webs and bits of old insulation falling down. It looked like the perfect hiding place for someone sneaky. My mom's boyfriend crawled through and came up into the basement, shining his flashlight around. It made my stomach turn thinking about it, because I remembered that day so clearly. That man I saw in the basement, it wasn't a ghost or a trick of the light. It was a real person, some creep who had been breaking into our house through that hole and crawling through the crawl space just to get inside. The idea that I had been alone in the house with him at least once, maybe more, was one of the most terrifying feelings I've ever had. I thought about all the times I was the only one there, turning off lights, locking doors, going about my day like everything was normal, but that man could have been right there in the basement, watching, waiting. My parents immediately called the police, and they came to investigate the hole in the crawl space. The police said whoever was doing this was very careful, coming in at times when no one else was home or when they knew the family would be distracted. They had been stealing money quietly so no one would notice right away. After they fixed the hole and sealed up the crawl space, my family installed new locks on all the basement windows and doors. They even put alarms on the basement door and motion sensors around the house. We were all a lot more cautious after that. My parents started changing their routines, checking the house carefully, and never leaving me home alone for long. Looking back, I realized how lucky I was. The man could have been dangerous. He could have hurt me or taken me if he wanted to. But somehow, I never saw him close up or heard him speak. Maybe he was scared of me or just wanted to get in and out without being noticed. Either way, that experience left a mark on me. It taught me that sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters, but real people who sneak into your life when you least expect it. I never forgot the feeling of seeing that shadowy figure at the bottom of the basement stairs. It wasn't just fear, it was the sudden, shocking understanding that the house I thought was safe wasn't safe at all. For years after that, whenever I came home alone or heard noises in the dark, I would check every lock and every light twice, just to be sure no one was still hiding in the shadows. That old house taught me how real fear feels, and how important it is to trust your instincts, even when no one else believes you. When I first heard my dad tell the story, it was late one night, sitting on the edge of his bed. He didn't say much, just enough to make me understand how close he had come to losing his life. Over the years, that story stuck with me, gnawing away quietly in the back of my mind. And when I finally got my learner's permit, he took me out to that exact spot, the sharp curve on those old back roads, to show me what reckless driving could do. What I'm about to tell you is how that story really went, the details that were never softened or cleaned up, just raw and real. It was the 1960s. My dad and a group of friends were all teenagers, caught up in that restless, wild time when the world felt like it was waiting for you to make some kind of mark. Any mark at all. One night, they got together and started drinking. Back then, it wasn't unusual for kids to sneak some booze and head out somewhere to feel free, away from prying eyes and rules. That night, they took my dad's old pickup truck and decided to drive down some back roads out in the country, just letting the engine roar and the tires bite into the dirt and gravel. The air was thick with smoke and laughter, slurred words, and the kind of careless excitement that comes with being young and drunk. The truck was old but sturdy, a beat-up workhorse that had seen plenty of use. It was packed with 5 of them. My dad was there with 4 others, including a girl who had been there since early in the night. Everyone was hammered except my dad, who, though buzzed, was the least drunk of the group. He wasn't sure what had snapped in his head that night, but at some point he decided it was time to get out. He demanded they stop the truck, so he and the girl could walk the rest of the way to town. The others didn't like the idea, but were too drunk to argue much, so the truck slowed, pulled over, and my dad and the girl climbed down. The moment their feet hit the road, my dad felt a wave of quiet hit him. The laughter and noise faded, replaced by the hum of the night. The wind through the trees, distant sounds of a farm dog barking, the rustle of leaves. The others watched them for a moment before revving the engine and speeding off down the road, disappearing into the darkness in the opposite direction. The walk was slow at first. The road stretched out like a black ribbon, lit only by the moon and the stars. The girl walked beside him, but neither spoke much. My dad's thoughts were scattered, unsettled by the sudden silence and the cool night air pressing on him. Less than a mile from where they got out, the road took a sharp, almost brutal turn. The kind of turn you notice only when you're forced to slow down, the kind that catches you by surprise if you're speeding. That turn, my dad later explained, was notorious in the area. Drivers had to slow down a lot to make it safely. But the three friends still in the truck weren't thinking about the dangers. The driver had the pedal pushed hard, the truck flying down the road at what must have been close to 100 miles per hour, maybe more. They didn't see the curve coming, or if they did, it was too late. The truck slammed into a tree with a force that was devastating. The sound was like a thunderclap, something that could shatter windows miles away. Two of the friends died instantly, their bodies crushed beyond recognition. The third survived the impact, but was seriously injured, paralyzed, missing a leg and part of an arm. He spent months in the hospital, fighting for his life with the medical care available in the 60s, which was limited compared to what we have today. After 8 long months, he died. What saved him, my dad said, was sheer luck. The truck had crashed right in front of a house where 2 doctors lived. They rushed out to help, cutting through the wreckage and doing what they could on the spot. Without them, none of the 3 would have survived the initial crash, let alone the hours afterward. After the accident, the driver's father took what was left of the truck and hung the twisted, mangled wreck in the center of town. It stayed there for months, a grim warning to anyone who drove recklessly. Everyone knew the story, but still, the crash was a haunting reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. Years later, when I was learning to drive, my dad brought me out to that curve. The memory of that night weighed heavily on him. Standing there, he traced the bend with his finger and told me to always respect the road. The wind carried the sounds of cars far away, but I could almost hear the ghost of that crash, the way the truck had slammed into the tree, the cries of the friends who never made it. I got goosebumps just standing there, imagining how close he had been to that truck, how close to being one of the ones crushed under metal and broken glass. The story never had a supernatural end or a miracle save. It was just the raw, brutal truth about how reckless decisions have consequences, some that echo for decades. My dad never drank and drove again after that night. He never let me or anyone else forget what happened. And every time I drive past that corner, I feel it, that weight of memory, the lives lost, the warning carved into the road itself. It's a piece of history, a reminder that some nights change everything, and some roads demand respect, no matter how fast you want to go. I grew up in a small town where nothing much ever seemed to happen. The kind of place where you knew every street, every neighbor, and every story that passed through. But there was one story that never left me. It was the kind of story that clings to you like a shadow you can't shake no matter how far you go. It happened just around the corner from where I lived, literally a 2-minute drive away, and it changed the way I looked at that quiet stretch of highway forever. It started with a woman named Judy Kirby. I remember her name because everyone in town talked about her after that terrible day. Judy wasn't just any woman. She was someone who seemed to be falling apart. She had been in the hospital for depression, and from what people whispered, her life had been spiraling. She just ended a relationship with her ex-husband's brother, and there were rumors she was involved in some drug trafficking, with a police arrest hanging over her like a dark cloud. The day it all happened was supposed to be special. It was her nephew's 10th birthday, her sister's son. He was a bright kid, full of energy, excited for the day ahead. Judy picked him up that morning. Along with him, she had her own 3 children in the car. The plan, as she told people, was to pick up a birthday gift for the nephew. That's what she said before she disappeared. But she didn't go anywhere to buy a gift. Instead, She drove away with all 4 children in the car, vanishing without a trace. Nobody knew where she was for a while, but soon the horror began to unfold. It was around midday when the first call started flooding into 911. People were reporting a car going the wrong way on the highway. The highway was a divided road, designed to keep traffic moving safely in 2 directions separated by a median. But Judy was driving against the flow, speeding dangerously fast, a vehicle heading straight into disaster. The reports were frantic. Drivers were swerving to avoid her, honking and shouting, but there was no stopping her. The car was barreling down the highway in the wrong direction, and it was only a matter of time before something terrible happened. In the other car was a father driving with his 2 children, along with another child riding along for the day. They were just ordinary people, out for a drive, unaware that their lives were about to be shattered. The collision happened just 90 seconds after the first calls. A head-on crash that was so violent it destroyed both vehicles in an instant. The impact was brutal beyond belief. When the emergency crews arrived, what they found was almost unimaginable. The highway was littered with pieces of children, small limbs, torn clothing, broken toys scattered among the wreckage. It was a scene no one could forget. Miraculously, Judy survived. So did the child who was with the father in the other car. Everyone else in both vehicles died at the scene. 6 children and 1 adult, wiped out in a single horrific moment. The news spread like wildfire. The entire town was shocked, devastated. It was hard to understand how something like this could happen just minutes from where we lived. In the days that followed, the story only grew darker. It came out that Judy had been struggling with deep depression and that the decision to drive the wrong way was no accident. It was a deliberate act, an attempt to end her own life that instead ended the lives of 7 innocent people. She was arrested and eventually sentenced to 215 years in prison. The highway where the crash happened was closed for days. Investigators combed through the wreckage, trying to piece together every detail of what had happened. They interviewed everyone they could, trying to understand Judy's state of mind. The town mourned. Parents held their children closer, haunted by the thought that such tragedy could happen so close to home. For me, the story stayed with me in a way that felt almost physical. Every time I drove past that stretch of highway, I could feel the weight of that day pressing down. I could picture the chaos of the crash, the shattered cars, the cries of sirens, and the heartbreak of families losing their loved ones in an instant. Years have passed since that day, but the memory is still sharp. I've learned that sometimes horror doesn't come from the supernatural or the unknown. Sometimes it comes from real life, from a moment when everything goes wrong, when a person's pain spills out and destroys everything around them. That stretch of road is quiet now, but I never forget. It's a reminder that behind every story is a real person, real lives forever changed. And for me, it's a warning that even in the calmest places, tragedy can strike when you least expect it. When I was a baby, my family had a normal kind of life, or at least it seemed that way from the stories I grew up hearing. My dad played on a local softball team. It was nothing serious, just a group of guys who worked regular jobs, got together once or twice a week, played a few innings, and then went out for beers and pizza afterward. It was the kind of social thing that helped people unwind. My parents made good friends among the other couples who came to the games, and most of them had young kids too. It was a close-knit group, the kind of people you'd trust enough to leave your kids with each other. One night, the whole group got together for a game like usual. 2 of the other couples, who were close friends of my parents, had planned to leave their kids with a babysitter they were sharing. The sitter was a young woman who had a boyfriend who sometimes stayed over at the house, and both families trusted her completely. It was common for the adults to split the cost and take turns watching the kids, so they could all hang out without worrying. After the game and a few beers, the 2 couples decided to go back to one of their houses to continue hanging out and drinking. My parents were invited to come along. Usually, my parents would have gone. It was a family event, and they all enjoyed spending time together. But on this night, I was fussy. I was a baby, maybe only a few months old, and something wasn't right. I kept crying and fussing, and my mom decided it was best to stay home with me instead of going out again. It wasn't something she usually did, but that night she insisted. The babysitter was already at the other house with the two families' kids when the adults returned. The kids ranged in age, but none were older than around 7 or 8. They all trusted the babysitter completely and felt safe. The adults left the kids in her care and went out for a bit, thinking they'd just be a short time. But that night turned out very different from what anyone expected. What I learned later, piece by piece from my dad and family friends, was that when the parents came back, they walked into a nightmare. 2 men had broken into the house. They were armed and dangerous. They didn't just want money, they wanted control. They tied up the babysitter, the babysitter's boyfriend, and all the kids. The terror they must have felt, being small and helpless, tied up with no way to escape, is something I can hardly imagine. The men forced the parents, now hostages, to do what they wanted. One of the dads worked at a local grocery store as a manager. The criminals made him go to work, forcing him to open the safe and clear out accounts. They also forced the other dads to drive to various banks, withdrawing money under threat. The entire ordeal lasted hours. The criminals kept tightening their grip, controlling every move, every second. After they'd gotten the money, they took the families back to the house. What happened next was the darkest part, the part my family still struggles to talk about without breaking down. The men killed everyone. The 2 families, the babysitter, her boyfriend, the kids, all of them. It was a massacre that shocked the community, a horror no one could prepare for. The police caught the men soon after. They had left evidence behind, mistakes that led to their arrest. During the trials, my dad attended every hearing. He told me later that it was the first time in his life he had thoughts about supporting the death penalty. The cruelty, the coldness of it all, how close we came to being part of that nightmare, haunted him. It haunts me too. For years, I thought the baby who had been saved by being fussy was me. My dad always told the story as if I had been the one tied up in that house and spared only because I was at home with my mom. But recently, I found out it was actually my older sister, born 9 years before me. She was the baby at the time. I'm not sure why the story got mixed up in my family, but knowing the truth doesn't make it any less chilling. It's just harder to think about the moment when a small, fussy baby's cries kept my family from being in that house at the wrong time. That baby could have been me, but it was my sister. The whole thing left a scar on our family that's never fully healed. The memory of those families lost, the kids, the babysitter, the violence, it lingers in the background of our lives. It's a reminder of how fragile safety can be, how quickly normal nights can turn into the worst kind of nightmare. My mom's decision to stay home with me that night wasn't just about fussiness. It was fate. I sometimes think about what life would have been like if we'd gone with the others that night. Would I even be here now? Will my parents have been able to protect me? I don't know. All I know is that life is unpredictable, and sometimes the smallest, simplest moments can change everything. The night my sister stayed safe at home, even just because she was crying and needed her mom, is the night that saved all of us from a horror story none of us ever wanted to live through. Before my dad died, he told me a story that he had never told anyone except his grandmother. He waited until he was lying in a hospital bed, connected to tubes and monitors, his skin pale and paper thin. He was dying slowly, but his voice was still steady when he spoke. He looked me straight in the eye when he said, "I need to tell you something that happened in Vietnam. Something I never told your mother or anyone else but Grandma." He told me it happened sometime in 1967, deep in the jungle, in a place that wasn't on any map. He didn't give me a name, just said it was near the Cambodian border. He was part of a special mission to plant seismic ground sensors along a trail network the North Vietnamese army had been using to move supplies and troops. The goal was to detect enemy movement and call in airstrikes or ambushes. It was dangerous work. Small teams, quiet insertion, no room for error. Just him, one other American named Richter, and 5 CDG strikers. South Vietnamese villagers trained and armed by the US to fight the Viet Cong and NVA. They'd been moving for 2 days, keeping off the trails, hacking slowly through dense underbrush with machetes, staying low and quiet. The jungle was heavy, wet, and full of bugs. Every breath felt like drinking hot, damp air. The ground sucked at their boots, and every step forward felt like fighting through a curtain of vines and thorny branches. At night, they took turns sleeping. No fires, no talking, no lights. Just sitting still, waiting out the dark with rifles across their laps and ears sharp for any sound out of place. On the third day, just after first light, my dad and two of the strikers, Min and Bao, split off from the rest of the team. They were tasked with scouting a trail intersection a few hundred meters to the east. The plan was to watch for signs of traffic before the rest of the patrol moved in to plant more sensors. The jungle was quiet that morning. The usual sounds were there: the droning of insects, the distant cackle of birds, the occasional crashing of monkeys in the canopy. But underneath it all, there was a stillness, like something waiting. They reached a thick patch of brush overlooking the trail intersection and settled in. They kept low, barely moving, using their binoculars to scan the trails. The sunlight filtered through the thick green above, casting dappled shadows across the trail. My dad said he remembered thinking how peaceful it looked, deceptively peaceful. 3 hours passed, maybe 4. They saw nothing. No foot traffic, no sign of recent movement. The trail looked abandoned. My dad leaned close to Min and said they'd give it another 30 minutes before pulling back. He didn't like staying in one spot too long, especially with a team so small. At the end of those 30 minutes, my dad checked the trail again. He raised his binoculars, swept the path slowly, left to right, and then paused. At first, he didn't understand what he was looking at. Just off the trail, near the junction, lying in the tall grass, was a figure. A man. The man wasn't Vietnamese. He wasn't wearing NVA gear or US jungle fatigues. My dad described him as a light-skinned black man with coarse hair and a thick beard. He was dressed in a deep blue jacket with brass buttons, worn and faded. He had 2 old-style pistols on his hips, a Spencer rifle across his chest, and a short, curved club hanging by his side. It didn't make sense. None of it did. My dad said he blinked a few times, thinking maybe he was seeing things, heat stroke or fatigue playing tricks on his eyes. But the figure didn't vanish. He was real, solid, lying there like he was waiting for something. And then the man turned his head and looked directly at my dad. My dad froze. He was trained to stay still, trained not to panic, but he said this was different. This wasn't combat. This wasn't something he'd ever prepared for. The man looked him in the eye, calm and steady. Then, slowly, he raised one hand, placed a finger to his lips, and held it there. "Be quiet." Then the man pointed first at my dad, then toward the underbrush, signaling him to move back. My dad didn't think. He just reacted. He tapped Min and Bao on the arms and motioned them back. They crawled slowly, carefully, inching away from the trail and deeper into the brush. My dad took one last look over his shoulder. The man was gone. The grass where he'd been lying was empty. 10 seconds later, the first NVA soldier stepped into view. They came out of the trees like shadows, quiet and fast. My dad counted at least 70, maybe 80, fully armed. AK-47s, light machine guns, RPGs slung over shoulders. They moved in a tight, disciplined column, rifles at the ready. My dad said his throat went dry. If he and his men had been even 10 seconds later, they would have stepped out onto that trail right as the NVA came through. They would have been wiped out. No question. He kept still, barely breathing. The NVA moved through the intersection without slowing. The whole thing took less than a minute. Then they were gone, swallowed back into the trees like they'd never been there. My dad waited a long time before moving. He didn't speak, just motioned for Min and Bao to follow. They backtracked quietly, retracing their path through the jungle until they linked up with the rest of the patrol just before nightfall. He told the team about the NVA column, marked the numbers and gear, and passed it up the chain when they returned to base. The intel helped avoid a disaster. A larger unit had been planning to move through that same trail network the next day. My dad's report saved lives, but he never said a word about the man he saw. Not in the debrief, not to his team, not to his CO. He kept it to himself for years. He told his grandmother sometime in the late 70s when she was on her deathbed. He didn't plan to. It just came out. She was lying there, eyes closed, breathing slow and shallow. He thought she was asleep, but when he told her about the man, described the clothes and the weapons, she smiled and said, "You saw old Red Tom." She didn't open her eyes, didn't explain, just said the name like it was something she already knew. My dad had never heard of Red Tom before that. After she passed, he started digging through old records, old family letters and stories. That's how he found out. Red Tom was our ancestor, my great-great-grandfather, a half-black, half-Creek man born free in Georgia before the Civil War. He served as a scout for the Union Army, then later with the U.S. Cavalry in the West. He was known for carrying 2 pistols, a Spencer rifle, and a Creek War club, the same gear my dad saw that day in Vietnam. It didn't make sense. Still doesn't. My dad was a practical man, not religious, not superstitious. He'd been through war, had seen what bullets and shrapnel could do to human flesh. He believed in things he could see and touch, but he never doubted what he saw that day. Not once. He said he didn't think it was a ghost or a dream. He said it felt real, more real than anything else in that jungle. Like the world had cracked open for a second and something stepped through. He didn't try to explain it, just told me what happened and left it at that. Said he'd carry the memory for over 50 years, always wondering why it happened, why he saw what he saw. He said maybe it was just luck, or maybe something deeper. Maybe sometimes the people who came before us aren't as far away as we think. Maybe blood and bone remember things that the mind can't explain. When he died, I thought about that story every day for weeks. I thought about Red Tom. I looked him up, read what little I could find in the records. There wasn't much, just a few scattered notes, mentions in old Army documents, one faded photograph from the 1870s. A hard-looking man with strong features, eyes sharp even in the grainy picture. The same eyes my dad had, the same eyes I see when I look in the mirror. I don't know what to make of it. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or spirits or visions, but I believe my dad. I believe he saw what he saw, and I believe that if he hadn't, I might not be here. Some things we inherit through blood. Other things come through memory, through stories passed down in whispers at the edge of sleep. My dad told me this story so I know where I come from. So I know that sometimes, when it matters most, the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it steps out of the jungle, looks you in the eye, and shows you the way home. It happened a few years back. I remember the air was warm but damp, the kind of night that makes the road feel even darker than it should be. The clouds were low, hanging heavy, and there was no moon in the sky, the kind of dark that seems to press against your windows. I was in the passenger seat. My mom was driving. We were coming back from my aunt's place, some town out past the woods. We'd stayed later than we meant to, and by the time we hit that stretch of road between towns, it was just us and the forest. That road, God, I still remember it, winding through thick trees, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass without one dipping onto the gravel shoulder. No streetlights, not even reflectors on the trees. You just had to trust your headlights and keep your hands steady. I remember the rhythm of the tires on the seams in the pavement, the way it sounded hollow in places, like the ground underneath had been eaten away by rainwater. We weren't talking much. The radio was on low, just some scratchy music playing through the static. I wasn't even paying attention. I was staring out into the trees, watching the headlights swing from trunk to trunk. It's strange how the forest can feel alive at night, like it's watching you pass. You only get glimpses in the light, just enough to make you wonder what's out there, crouching just past the reach of the beams. That's when it happened. We were doing maybe 45, just coasting along, when a figure burst out of the woods and ran into the road. No warning, no sound, just suddenly there. My mom slammed on the brakes. Hard. The seatbelt bit into my chest, and I threw out my arm on instinct. The tires screeched, and the car jolted to a stop, swerving a little as it slid on the asphalt. My heart was pounding. The headlights lit up the guy, standing just 10 feet ahead of the car. He wasn't looking at us. He was just there, standing, slightly hunched, breathing heavy like he'd been running for a while, wearing dark clothes, torn up like he'd been in the woods for days, dirt on his face, hair matted with sweat or maybe blood. I couldn't tell in that light. His eyes, though, that's what I remember most. Wide, panicked, like a cornered animal. At first, I thought he needed help, that he was in some kind of trouble. But then he looked up, and when he looked up, he didn't step forward or wave or say anything. He just turned slightly toward the forest again, and that's when the others came out. 3 more men, one on each side of the car and one directly behind. They stepped out of the trees like they'd been waiting, like they knew we were coming. It took a second for my brain to catch up with what I was seeing. They were all moving fast, not toward the guy in the road, but toward the car, toward us. I heard the first one trying the back door on my side, pulling at the handle. The locks clicked just before he got it open. My mom had hit the lock button the moment she saw the first one move. He yanked it again. Locked. Another one went for the passenger side behind her, then the rear hatch. They circled fast, quick and practiced, like they knew how long it might take for someone to react. One of them even tried to pull open the driver's door. I saw my mom press herself back in her seat, one hand locked on the steering wheel, the other fumbling for the shifter. The guy in front just stood there like he was blocking the road, like he thought she wouldn't go through him. But she did. She didn't wait. The second she got in a drive, she floored it. The guy in front dove to the side at the last second. She didn't even slow down. Gravel kicked up behind us as we took off. I twisted in my seat, looking back through the rear window, and I saw them. All 4 of them standing there in the headlights that now belonged to someone else. Just watching us go. Not chasing. Just watching. We didn't talk. Not for a while. My mom kept driving, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, eyes locked on the road. She was going too fast for that stretch, pushing 60, then 70. But she didn't ease up. Not until we hit the edge of the next town and the road opened up into street lights and buildings and signs. Civilization. Safety. She pulled into a gas station without a word, parked under the brightest light she could find, and just sat there, breathing hard, hands still on the wheel. I could see how much they were shaking. I looked around. Every normal sound, every person at the pumps or walking out of the convenience store felt surreal, like we passed through something wrong and had just barely made it out. That was the scariest part. The fact that it wasn't some wild animal or ghost story. It was people, real people, doing something planned. They didn't want to talk. They didn't want to ride or help. They wanted inside. And we don't know what would have happened if the doors hadn't been locked. What gets me is how fast it all happened. From the moment that first man stepped into the road to the moment we pulled away, maybe 30 seconds. Maybe less. That's all it took. I still think about it sometimes. The way they moved. The way they didn't speak. The way the first guy looked. Not like someone running from danger, but like bait. Like he was meant to stop the car. Get us to react. Get us to open up. Unlock the doors. Step outside. It wasn't random. It was a setup. That stretch of road has no cameras. No houses. No driveways. Just a long, empty ribbon through the trees. If they'd gotten in, if she hadn't hit that lock button. I don't let my mind finish the sentence. I don't need to. What I do know, what I've never forgotten, is what saved us. It wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It was the simple fact that she always locks the doors as soon as she starts the car. Not after. Not once you're moving. Right then. Every time. It's habit for her. Always has been. I used to tease her for it. Say we weren't in a bad neighborhood. That it wasn't necessary. But I don't say that anymore. Because when things go bad, they don't always give you time to think. They don't give you time to reach down and hit that button. They come fast. Quiet. From the sides. From the dark. And they count on you being distracted. If those doors had been unlocked, it wouldn't have been a story I'm telling now. It would have been something else. Something worse. I think about that night more than I like to admit. Not every day, but often. Especially when I'm on some quiet road, or when I see someone walking too close to a car or red light. Especially when I drive at night. There's no comfort in it. No moral that makes you feel good. It just reminds me that danger doesn't always come with a warning. It doesn't wear a mask or carry a knife. Sometimes it looks like a guy in trouble, a guy in need, a guy who just ran out onto the road and needs help. And that's what makes it so scary. Because most people want to help. Most people would have stopped. And most people wouldn't have locked their doors. We never called the police. My mom didn't want to. She just wanted to put it behind us, say nothing happened, and move on. I didn't understand that then, but I do now. What would we say? For men, try to get in our car? No plates, no faces, no injuries, no damage. Just a story, just a warning. But I think about who else might have driven that same road. Who else might have stopped? Who might not have locked their doors? And whether they ever made it to the next town, that thought sticks with me. Every single time I hear a story on the news about someone gone missing in the woods or found off a back road, I think of that night. That silent stretch of blacktop in the middle of nowhere. Those eyes in the dark. And the sound of a locked door handle being yanked, hard, and not opening. It was always a running joke in our family that my grandparents had a knack for finding haunted houses. Not the classic haunted mansion you see in movies with cobwebs and thunder cracking outside, but the kind of houses that looked normal, felt lived in, even cozy at times. Places that you wouldn't look twice at from the outside. But then you'd start staying there, and small things would start to pile up. Weird sounds, lights flickering, doors that didn't seem to stay closed, even the feeling that someone was watching you from across the room. My cousins had stories. My parents had stories. But I never really believed any of them. It just seemed like something people liked to talk about, like they wanted the place to be haunted, so it would be more interesting. I used to roll my eyes every time someone brought up another incident. That was until the summer I was about 13 or 14. I had just finished another school year, and my parents shipped me off for a couple weeks to stay with my grandparents in their latest home. It was a pretty normal-looking ranch-style house with beige siding, an attached garage, and a long hallway down the middle with rooms branching off. It had that faint smell of old carpet and furniture cleaner. Nothing seemed off when I first got there. Nothing felt weird. It just felt like summer. At that age, I was completely obsessed with video games. Every night, I'd stay up past midnight, snacking on whatever junk food I could scrounge from the kitchen. Doritos, Gushers, Little Debbie cakes, you name it. I had brought my little flat-screen TV and my Xbox, and I'd set it all up in the room at the very end of the hallway, directly across from my grandparents' bedroom. My bed was shoved up against the wall that connected to the hallway, with the headboard lined up just beneath the doorknob. Now, the house had thick carpeted floors, the kind that muted most sounds. But if someone was walking directly down the hallway, especially late at night, when everything else was silent, I could feel the vibration through the floorboards. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even really a sound. It was more like a subtle pressure you could sense if you were lying still, the kind of thing that didn't register unless you were already familiar with it. At first, I didn't think much of it. My grandpa had a habit of getting up in the middle of the night to grab Tums or a glass of water. I knew his routine well. The slow, deliberate steps as he made his way to the hallway closet where they kept the medicine, then the return footsteps, and finally the quiet click of their bedroom door closing. It happened like clockwork most nights, and I guess I got used to it. But after a few days, I started noticing that sometimes I'd hear the footsteps at odd hours, like past 1 or 2 a.m. That alone wasn't too weird. People get up during the night for all sorts of reasons. What was weird was that when I'd open the door immediately after hearing them, the hallway would be completely empty. No sound, no fading footsteps, just stillness, like nobody had been there at all. The light from the living room night light didn't reach all the way down to my end of the hallway, so beyond a few feet, it was pitch black. I would wait, standing there, squinting into the darkness, expecting to see movement. But nothing ever moved. Still, I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I told myself my grandpa had probably just made it back into bed before I opened the door. It made sense. He was old, but he wasn't slow. I also didn't want to admit I was getting spooked by footsteps. Eventually, the footsteps just became part of the night. I got used to them the same way you get used to the hum of a refrigerator or the ticking of a clock. It was just background noise. Sometimes they came early, sometimes late. Sometimes I'd even fall asleep before they started. But they were always the same. Soft, deliberate steps moving down the hall. A pause, then returning steps. One night, about halfway through my stay, I was lying on my bed watching TV with the volume low. The rest of the house was dead quiet. I could hear the occasional hum from the fridge in the kitchen, and the cicadas outside through the slightly cracked window. It was one of those thick, humid summer nights where the air felt heavy. I was halfway through some late-night cartoon, thinking about heading to the kitchen for another soda, when the footsteps started again. I didn't even flinch. They started at the far end of the hall like always, just that gentle pressure of footfalls on thick carpet. They made their way past my door toward the closet. Then they turned around back toward me. This was normal. This was routine. But this time, they didn't keep walking. They stopped, right outside my door. At first, I figured it was just a pause. Maybe he was checking something on a shelf. But then, out of nowhere, the doorknob right beside my head started rattling. Fast, like someone was twisting it back and forth over and over again without trying to open the door, just turning it like they were testing to see if it was locked or not. I jumped up, completely alert now, my heart hammering in my chest. I stared at the doorknob, watching it move slightly, hearing the metallic clack, clack, clack of it twisting, but not turning fully. I didn't even have time to think. I yanked open the door, expecting, hoping, to catch my grandpa there, grinning like a jackass because he'd managed to scare me. But the hallway was empty. Not just empty, it was dark. Cold air brushed past my legs as I stepped out, and the carpet felt unusually cool beneath my feet. I looked left and right. The closet door was shut. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, staring down the hall, waiting for movement, listening for the sound of retreating steps. But it was like whatever had been there just vanished the second I opened the door. I slowly turned toward my grandparents' room, which was directly across from mine. Their door was shut, but I put my ear to it. I could hear snoring, deep, rhythmic snoring, my grandpa's unmistakable breathing. I opened the door a crack and peeked in. Both of them were fast asleep, the blanket rising and falling with each breath. The glow from their night light gave the room a dim orange tint, and there was no sign that anyone had gotten up recently. Nothing was out of place. I shut their door quietly and stood in the hallway again, staring at my doorknob. I reached out and gave it a twist. It moved smoothly, silently. I shook it a little just to see if it would rattle the same way. It didn't. That fast, back and forth twisting noise from earlier, that was different. It was frantic, deliberate. I went back into my room and locked the door for the first time since arriving. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little creak in the house put me on edge. The buzzing of a fly, the groan of the AC starting up. I kept imagining someone standing just outside my door, hand hovering over the knob, waiting for me to fall asleep again. After that night, things changed. I didn't stop hearing the footsteps. They came almost every night, but now I noticed them more. They didn't always follow the same pattern anymore. Sometimes they'd stop in the middle of the hallway for longer than usual. Sometimes they wouldn't come at all, which somehow made me more anxious. The nights they didn't come felt like something was waiting. I didn't tell my grandparents. I didn't want them to think I was scared. I also didn't want to hear them say, "Oh yeah, this place is weird like that." Because if they said it, then it became real. And I wasn't ready to believe it was real yet. I started sleeping with the TV on and a pillow pressed against the headboard, so I didn't have to hear or feel the footsteps as much. I kept snacks in my room, so I wouldn't have to walk down the hallway alone at night. I even moved a small dresser in front of my door, not enough to block it completely, just enough that anything tried getting would make noise. I told myself it was just to feel safer, not because I actually thought something would try to come in. The last few days of my stay, I hardly slept at all. I was constantly tired, on edge, waiting. Nothing ever happened again as intense as the doorknob, but the sense that someone or something was aware of me never went away. It was like something had noticed that I noticed it, and now it was watching me too. I caught myself staring at the closet across the hall, thinking maybe someone had gone inside and never come out. I knew how dumb that sounded, but the thought wouldn't leave my head. When my parents finally came to pick me up, I felt this overwhelming wave of relief the moment we pulled out of the driveway. I didn't say much in the car. I didn't tell them what happened. I just said the house made weird noises at night, and I was ready to be home. That was years ago. Since then, my grandparents have moved again, of course, and are now living in another quiet little house that looks totally normal. But I've never stayed the night there. Not once. I'll visit during the day, sit at the kitchen table, drink coffee, and smile at their new furniture. But when the sun starts going down, I always have somewhere else I need to be. I don't know what the footsteps were. I don't know why the doorknob rattled that way. I don't believe in ghosts, or at least I try not to. But I do believe that some places are just off in ways we can't fully explain. Maybe it's something in the wiring, or the way the walls are built, or how old the insulation is. Or maybe certain houses remember the people who lived in them before, and some of those people aren't ready to be forgotten. All I know is that ever since that summer, I can't fall asleep without listening for footsteps. Even in my own house. Even when I know I'm alone. I'll be lying in bed, the TV flickering quietly in the background, and I'll feel that soft, familiar pressure like someone walking just outside my door. And every time I freeze, I wait, I listen, and I never open the door. I live alone in a small house on the edge of town, just a bit too far from anything, but not far enough to feel isolated. It was quiet, comfortable, and the kind of place you could just exist without anyone bothering you. I had a job I didn't mind too much, a garden out back, and enough space to breathe. The house wasn't anything special. One floor with an attic, 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and an old garage that was more storage than anything. It was the kind of place you could clean from top to bottom in a few hours. I like that. I like knowing where everything was, where everything should be. That's probably why it started bothering me when things didn't add up. It wasn't big at first. I make a pot of soup enough to last a few days, but it would be gone in 2. At first, I just figured I was eating more than I thought. Or maybe I spilled some while pouring it into containers. You tell yourself all kinds of small things to explain away something that doesn't quite make sense. Then it was the eggs. I always kept a dozen on hand, usually went through them slowly. One morning I opened the carton and noticed only 6 were left. I didn't remember eating 6 eggs, but I shrugged it off. Maybe I baked something and forgot. Maybe I was just tired lately. The weirdness kept building in little ways. Sometimes I go to do a load of laundry and find the towels in the hamper were damp. I didn't remember using them. One morning, I opened the dishwasher and there were more plates in there than I remembered using. I stood there for a long time, staring at those dishes, just trying to figure out how I could have gone so long without noticing. Was I losing time? Was I just getting older, more forgetful? Then there were other things. My heating bill was slightly higher, even when I hadn't turned it up. The kitchen light would be on when I came home from work, even though I was sure I turned it off that morning. I'd hear faint sounds at night, but they were always just out of reach, soft thumps, something shifting above my head. I chalked it up to the house settling or squirrels in the attic. You don't want to believe anything strange is going on, not in your own home. I didn't talk about it with anyone. It felt too silly, like the moment I said it out loud, it would become real and then I'd have to do something about it. I didn't want to face the idea that something might be wrong. I thought I just needed sleep, maybe a break from work. I kept brushing it all off, telling myself not to worry. That worked until the night I was sitting in my living room, reading. It was around 9. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you. Then I heard a noise, a definite noise from the ceiling. A muffled thump, followed by something scraping. Not a soft house settling sound, not wind, not pipes, something alive. I froze. The book slipped from my hands and hit the carpet. I stared up at the ceiling, not daring to move. My heart was pounding, but I told myself again, maybe it's a raccoon. Maybe a bird got in, but something in my chest knew it wasn't. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my bed with the light on, listening. I didn't hear anything else, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been moving around up there. I was too scared to go check. The next day, I took the afternoon off work. I went to the hardware store, bought a flashlight, and brought the stepladder in from the garage. I waited until the sun was high and bright. I didn't want to find anything, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. My attic was accessed by one of those pull-down ladders in the hallway. I hadn't been up there in over a year. I didn't store much up there, just a few boxes of old clothes and books. I climbed the ladder slowly, flashlight in hand, heart hammering in my chest. The moment I pushed the hatch open, I felt a wave of cold air drift down. Not freezing, but not right either. I hesitated for a moment before pulling myself up. The attic smelled different, not like dust and wood. It smelled lived in, body odor, food, something stale. I swept the flashlight around and saw shapes that didn't belong. A sleeping bag laid out on a flattened section of insulation. A pillow, a pile of crumpled food wrappers, granola bars, fast food, a few empty water bottles. Off to the side was a small hot plate, unplugged. Next to it was a radio. There were books stacked neatly, some clothes folded in a plastic bin. Someone had been living up here. I backed down the ladder so fast I almost fell. My knees were shaking. I didn't even bother closing the hatch. I called the police from my car. I didn't want to be in the house anymore. I told them everything. They came out pretty quickly. Small town, not much else going on. I waited outside while they checked the place. They confirmed what I already knew. Someone had been staying up there. They found a small hole in the attic window. Looked like it had been pushed open from the outside. There was a tall tree next to that side of the house, plenty close enough for someone to climb and reach the window. The officers told me they'd keep an eye on the place, especially during the day when I was gone. They figured whoever had been watching me closely, learning my schedule, slipping in while I was at work and staying quiet enough to go unnoticed. I didn't know whether to feel terrified or violated or just plain stupid. I had missed so many signs. The next few days were tense. I didn't sleep well. Every creak made me jump. I kept all the lights on. I double-checked the locks. The police came by a few times, but didn't catch anyone right away. I went to work every day with a sick feeling in my gut, waiting for a call. It happened on a Wednesday. I got a call from one of the officers. They'd caught the man trying to climb the tree again in the late morning. One of the neighbors had seen him and called it in. He didn't run. He didn't resist. Just came down slowly, like he knew it was over. They took him in for trespassing and asked if I wanted to press charges. That should have been the end of it, but it didn't sit right with me. I asked about him, who he was, what his story was. They told me he didn't have much. No home, no job, just drifting. No weapons on him, no drugs, nothing dangerous. He was just trying to get by. He had been using the attic as a shelter, treating my house like a second home without me knowing. It was creepy, yes. It still makes my skin crawl knowing he was that close, that quiet for so long. But he didn't steal anything. He didn't wreck the place. He just did. I don't really know why I did it, but I told the police I didn't want to press charges. I asked if I could talk to him. They let me. I expected to be angry, to shout at him, to demand answers. But when I saw him, just a man, skinny, tired, worn down by life, I didn't feel angry. I felt a kind of heavy sadness. He looked like someone who had been invisible for a long time. He was polite, soft-spoken. He told me he never meant to scare me, never meant harm, just needed a place out of the cold. He said he used to work construction, had a bad run of luck. He lost his job, then his place, then his car. It just spiraled. He'd been sleeping in parks and behind buildings until he saw the tree outside my house. He noticed my routine. When I was gone, when I was home, he'd climb in, eat a little, wash up, sleep. Then he'd clean up after himself and leave before I came home. He thought he was being respectful. I guess in his own strange way, he was. He didn't take more than he needed. He didn't make a mess. He said he always made sure to leave it like he found it. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I just let him talk. I still don't know what made me do what I did next. Maybe it was because I lived alone and knew how it felt to feel unseen. Maybe I just didn't want another person to be thrown away. I offered to let him stay. Not in the attic. That was done. But in the spare room. Just for a while. Until he could get on his feet. I told him there'd be rules. No sneaking. No lying. He agreed. Almost like he couldn't believe I was serious. The police weren't happy about it, but they let it go. They made him sign some kind of agreement, something about not returning without permission. But I gave him that permission. It was strange at first, having him there. I locked my door at night for the first few weeks. I kept the knife in my nightstand, just in case. But nothing bad happened. He kept to himself, stayed clean, helped around the house. After a while, I started to relax. He found work after a month. A guy he used to know was still doing construction and needed help. He went every day, came back tired but grateful. He paid rent, just a little, but it was something. He fixed things around the house I hadn't even noticed were broken. Slowly, things started to feel normal again. We didn't become best friends or anything, but we respected each other. I gave him a second chance, and he didn't waste it. After about 8 months, he found a place of his own, a tiny apartment across town. He still calls sometimes, leaves a message if I don't pick up. Sometimes he brings groceries over, just to say thanks. It's still hard to think about the months he lived above me without me knowing. I still wake up sometimes wondering if someone's moving up there. But I check, and it's always empty now. Just insulation, dust, and quiet. I changed the window, made sure it couldn't be opened again. I keep the tree trimmed now, far from the roofline. What happened was creepy. It still gives me chills if I let myself think about it too much. But it didn't end in violence. No ghosts, no break-ins. Just a man who got lost in life and found shelter where he could. And me, learning that sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones that want to hurt you. They're the ones you don't see, the ones hiding in plain sight, just trying to survive. It's been a few years now. My house is still the same. Quiet, a little lonely sometimes. But I know more about the world now. About people. About the things we miss when we think everything is